Check 1 2. Check 1 2.
Testing, 1 2 3.
Good morning, everyone. I have a quorum of the Planning Committee in the room, so I'll call the committee to order and welcome everyone to the 83rd meeting of the Planning Committee for this term of council and our last for this term. It is Tuesday, the 25th of November, and if you're here to speak on any of the items that are on today's agenda, if you'd fill in a white request to speak form that's located at the desk under the Ottawa, big Ottawa sign over to my right, and bring it to the committee and hand it to the committee assistant. We'll make sure you get on the agenda to speak to the committee. If you don't wish to speak to the committee, but you wish to file written comments that preserve your appeal rights, there is a comment sheet at the door, and we will make sure that your written comments form part of the public record. So, this is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 6 to 14 on today's agenda. For the items listed above, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board if Council does not adopt an amendment within 120 days after receipt of a complete application for zoning and 180 days after receipt of a complete application for an official plan amendment. Une feuille de commentaires est disponible à l'entrée pour toute personne désirant soumettre des commentaires écrits concernant les modifications. A comment sheet is available at the door for anyone who wishes to submit written comments on these amendments. I have had members of the committee no regrets. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes. Minutes 81, the 23rd of September, 2014. So carried. Minutes 82, the 2nd of October, 2014. Are those carried? Okay. So we're going to go through a consent agenda to see if we can get some of the items dealt with, so that we can focus on the ones that have that demand the committee's attention. So I'm going to start with Built Heritage Subcommittee, item number 1, designation of 66 and 78 Lisgar Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I have no one registered to speak to the committee with respect to item number 1. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak to the committee with respect to item number 1, the designation of 66 and 78 Lisgar Street? No? Members of committee, is item number 1 carried? Carried. Okay. Item number 2 is an application for a new construction on Littleton Avenue, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. I have one person registered to speak. He says he's the owner. Who filled in a white request to speak form but didn't tell me who you were. Who are you? Okay. So, okay. It'd be nice if you tell me who you are so I can address you when I talk to you. I'm going to come back to you in a second, though. Is there anyone else in the audience other than the owner who wishes to speak to the committee with respect to item number 2, an application for new construction on Littleton Avenue? No. Sir, you don't need to speak to the committee as long as we're prepared to carry this item. Sir, I'll note that you've nodded in the affirmative that you do not need to speak to committee, but for the record, it would be nice if I could have your name. Cash, okay. Mr. Cash. Okay, Mr. Cash. Members of committee, is this item carried? Carried. There you go. Item number 3 is an application to alter 241 Park Road, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. I have no one registered to speak to the committee with respect to that item. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak to the committee with respect to an application to alter 241 Park Road, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District? Okay, members of committee, is item number 3 carried? Carried. Okay. Item number 4 is the designation of the Harton Hotel, 1993 Robertson Road, under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I have no one registered to speak to the committee with respect to that item. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak to the committee with respect to item number 4, designation of the Harton Hotel? Let's make sure there's no one here to speak. Okay, members of the committee, is it carried? Carried. Excellent. Once again, 14 years after, we have saved Nepean. Okay, item number 5 is status update, planning committee inquiries and motions for the period ending 18th of November 2014. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak to the committee with respect to item number 5, status update, planning committee inquiries and motions for the period ending the 18th of November 2014? Oh. Members of committee, can we receive that item? Okay. Item number 6 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 1590 Belcourt Boulevard. I have one person registered to speak, Mr. Fernie, for the applicant. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak to the committee with respect to 1590 Belcourt Boulevard? Mr. Fernie, you don't need to speak to the committee as long as we're prepared to carry this application? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fernie. Members of committee, is item number 6 carried? Carried. Okay. Item number 7 is the zoning bylaw amendment for 2570 Old Second Line Road. I have no one registered to speak to the committee with respect to item number 7, which is a zoning bylaw amendment 2570 Old Second Line Road. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak to the committee with respect to this item? Nope. Okay, members of committee, is item 7 carried? Carried? Okay. Item number 8 is a zoning bylaw amendment 3581 John Shaw Road. I have no one registered to speak to the committee with respect to item 8, a zoning bylaw amendment 3581 John Shaw Road. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak to the committee with respect to this item? Members of committee, is item number 8 carried? Carried. Item number 9 is a zoning bylaw amendment 1872 Maryville Road and 530 and 540 West Hunt Club Road. We have one person registered to speak to the committee with respect to this item, Jill Stewart and Lloyd Phillips. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak to the committee with respect to item number 9, zoning bylaw amendment 1872 Maryville Road and 530, 540 West Hunt Club Road? Ms. Stewart, Mr. Phillips, you're here? And you don't need to speak to the committee as long as we're prepared to carry this item? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Ms. Stewart. Members of committee, is item number 9 carried? Carried. Okay. Item number 10 is a zoning bylaw amendment 6771 Marquette Road, and I have one person registered to speak to the committee with respect to that item, Karen Barber, who is in opposition. Ms. Barber, you're here? Oh yeah, okay. And you want to speak to the committee? Perfect. Okay. So we'll hold this item and we'll come back to it. Oh, I see there's Mr. Casagrande is here for item number 10 too. Oh, there's a number of them. Sorry, I didn't catch all of you. Ms. Barber, Karen Henning, Mr. Casagrande, and Hughes Renault. So, okay, so we're going to come back to item number 10. So, item number 11 is the zoning, 460 Saint Laurent Boulevard. zoning anomaly, 467 Ottawa Boulevard. I have one person registered to speak to the committee with respect to this item, Mr. Tremblay. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak to the committee with respect to the zoning anomaly at 467 Ottawa Boulevard? No. Mr. Tremblay, you don't need to speak to the committee as long as we're prepared to carry this item? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Tremblay. Members of committee, is item number 11 carried? Carried. Okay. Item number 12 is a zoning bylaw amendment, 4660 Farmers Way. I have one person registered to speak to the committee in agreement, Mr. Brunette. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak to the committee with respect to the zoning bylaw amendment 4660 Farmers Way? Nope. Mr. Burnett, you don't need to speak to the committee as long as we're prepared to carry this item? Okay, perfect. Members of committee, is item number 12, zoning bylaw amendment 4660 Farmers Way, carried? Carried? Okay. Item number 13 is a zoning bylaw amendment 5832 Bank Street. I have no one registered to speak to the committee with respect to that item. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak to the committee with respect to 5832 Bank Street?
I did request to speak, but
Okay. Hold on. We're going to try and find you. Okay. Right there. Sorry, we got you. Ms. Morris, right? And you're in agreement with the in agreement with the recommendation? Okay. So, and did I ask if there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak to the committee with respect to this item? The answer is no. You don't need to speak to the committee as long as you're prepared to carry this item? No, I do not. Perfect. Members of committee, is the item carried? Zoning bylaw amendment 5832 Bank Street. Carried. All right, item 14 we're going to come back to. Item 15 is a mural on 264 4th Avenue. Is that you? That's you, okay. I don't have anyone registered to speak to the committee with respect to that item. You're happy if we carry the submission? Ms. Gregoire's happy? Yes. Okay. On item 15, is it carried? Carried. Okay. And Councillor Hobbs has asked us to consider a motion with respect to 155 Clare Street, and it has been circulated to members of county, and it is to exempt it from the requirement for site plan control, right, for the fourth unit for the disabled individual. So we have to move this item onto the committee agenda. So we're going to have to suspend the rules to do that. So on suspension, is that carried? Okay. So on the item then? Carried. Okay, perfect. Okay. Going to go back to the held item number 10.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll turn it over to Ms. O'Connell, who will quickly run through the highlights of this application, just to give the committee an overview of location, what's being requested, and the staff recommendation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Councillors. Erin O'Connell, planner for the application. J'ai étudié le français, mais mon français n'est pas assez bon, donc j'ai amené quelqu'un avec moi pour parler français, Jean-Claude Renaud, avec moi. The application before us is a zoning amendment for 67 and 71 Marquette. The proposal is on Marquette Avenue in Vanier. It's about 225 meters east of Beechwood Avenue. This is a photo of the subject property. Right now, it's currently occupied by 2 single detached dwellings and 2 driveways. Just some context photos I'll run quickly through. So this is looking down Marquette Avenue, and the subject property is located on the left of the screen. This is looking west on Marquette towards Beechwood Avenue. There's a domicile project in the background on Beechwood Avenue, and that's a 10-story mixed-use building marked. The subject proposal is marked by the star there on the right. This is just to show some dwelling types that exist in the area in this part of Vanier. There's a mixture of unit types, single detached, duplex dwellings, and low-rise apartments. So the proposal before us is for a 20-unit purpose-built rental apartment building. 11 parking spaces are provided in a partially underground parking garage located at the rear of the property, and that's what has resulted in a majority of the zoning amendments being requested. Because the parking garage itself, located at the rear, is partially above grade, it's considered part of the building itself, and so anywhere where it abuts the property line requested an amendment to performance standards as a result of that. These are some renderings just showing the subject proposal before us. Through the initial submission, some changes were made to the design of the building. The height was reduced from the initially submitted, so they're not requesting any amendments to the height under the zoning bylaw. 1 visitor parking space was added to the underground lot as a result of some concerns by residents resulting from the requested amendment to visitor parking spaces. The parking area was enclosed at the rear. An emphasis was removed on the 3rd story, so they reduced part of the extension upwards, and they extended the 3rd floor balcony along the 3rd floor, so that reduces and sets back that part of the building as well. And initially in the submitted proposal, the main entrance to the building was on the side of the building, and so that's been relocated to the front to provide a more prominent entrance. And they relocated the number of units, or revised the number of units from 22 initially submitted down to 20 units. And Mr. Chair, I won't run through the policy context unless it's requested. It's a general urban area in the official plan. We look at the infill guidelines, and the zoning in this area is an R4E zone, which permits low-rise apartments. So what we're looking at is a series of performance standards being amended through the zoning bylaw amendment. And I can speak to those if necessary, if the chair requests it. So in general, we're recommending approval. There's minimal impacts from the proposal before us. It addresses the street in the context, and as such, we're recommending approval. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm looking at the performance standards, and I'm going to start off. It kind of strikes me odd that in the requirement of the R4E zone, you have a maximum of 4 units, yet your required parking is 12?
So the required...
And so now we're going to, which I find difficult to rationalize. It doesn't sound right that we would require 4 units with 12 parking spots. It's kind of an awful lot of parking. And now we're going to, and so I'm assuming the number of units, the 20 in the proposed and the parking, is more in line with what we would generally see in a low-rise apartment zone.
Yeah, the required number of parking spaces is associated with the number of units being requested. So right. It's 0.5 parking spaces required per unit. So, and there's also a visitor parking requirement
right.
of 2.
Okay. And what was the rationale in the beginning for the restriction for 4 units?
I think, Mr. Chairman, generally in the area, there is typically a smaller lot fabric associated with this area. And I think if you look around the area, you do see a lot of purpose-built walk-ups, three-story walk-up apartment buildings. I'm sure there are buildings in the area that accommodate more than 4 units, but given the lotting pattern, the smaller lotting pattern, it was primarily focused around that. In this instance, they actually consolidated lands, brought 2 properties together. The built form of the apartment, if we disregard the parking garage, completely complies with the performance standards, so the mass is allowed. And in this instance, the applicant has determined that they can accommodate additional units within that massive building as a result of the consolidation. So
I can build the building right now, same mass, same height, put 4 units in it, and what the applicant is saying is inside a building of that mass, you can reasonably accommodate more units.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, are there any other questions? Councillor Harder?
Just before we get to the delegations, I just was reading one of the submissions, and there seems to be, in this case at least, a question as to the transparency of the meetings that you've had. And it looks like that there's been a lot of communication, a lot of connection on this file, but the issue is that never identified in the initial letter, even after numerous emails, etc., that there was going to be need to be an exception. Can you comment on that?
The application itself is for a zoning bylaw amendment, so that identifies the requested change, and that was circulated as per typical protocol. There has been numerous communications with residents. A public meeting was held as well in the community, so procedure's been followed in that respect, and the application itself is to request the zoning amendment change, and that's the nature of the application.
Well, I think it's important to hear that because we're going to hear it from, I think, the delegations. Thank you.
Good. Councillor Hubley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions right now for staff. Trying to get a sense of what it is that's being proposed here. Like, is this a rooming house? Like individual people are going to come in and just rent individual rooms, and is that how they're getting up to 20 units?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, each of the dwelling units is individual dwelling unit, so it accommodates for its own kitchen and bathroom facilities. So a rooming unit would be shared facilities of that nature, but in this case, it's a mixture of 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, and bachelor units that each have their own facilities.
And with the removal of all the setbacks, is it in fact that if this was to be approved, that they will need to stage all the construction from the neighbors' properties? If they're building, if you've taken away all the setbacks, I'm trying to get my head around how they're going to build this without going onto the neighbors' properties.
I don't think it's atypical for underground parking garages to be constructed for lot lines, certainly in the urban area. So in terms of construction, it'll have to be accommodated as per construction protocol, and there's building code services will monitor that construction process. They won't be permitted to construct on adjacent properties.
They will not be permitted to use adjacent properties to construct? Is that what you just said?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
So the law have to be on site?
That's right.
How do we do that with these setbacks? Because the setbacks take them right to the property line.
As I said, I'm not, and perhaps Mr. Smith can clarify what the typical process.
I think, Mr. Chairman, this is all construction methodology and technique. And in this instance, yes, there is excavation. It will be going pretty well close to the property line for purposes of constructing the foundation. If the developer is able to secure rights to utilize adjacent lands, that's fine. But we see throughout the urban area, and I guess it's very typical, for example, in the downtown, where in fact you're building adjacent to buildings that are already built to the lot line, and they can in fact construct from within the property with access from the street. But that really is a construction detail, a construction methodology would have to be determined by the developer, and it's not uncommon to see this type of a condition occurring. If there is no ability to access the adjacent property for construction activity, they would have to determine the method to deal with it on the property itself.
So by us approving this, we're not giving them de facto approval to go onto their neighbors' properties to build this. That's a separate process altogether.
And through you, Mr. Chair, in fact, the zoning bylaw doesn't regulate underground parking garages, so they have the ability for any property to locate the underground parking garage up to the lot line without requesting an amendment to the zoning.
Thank you. And my other question with that was with the parking piece. You're still, even with the underground parking, or a bit underground, a bit above ground, you're still requiring a number of on-street parking spaces, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the requested amendment initially requested 0 visitor parking spaces to accommodate this, and they're required to provide 2. Through a revision, they've now accommodated for 1 visitor parking space in that underground lot. The point in the report, I think, was that existing right now on the property are 2 detached dwellings with 2 driveways that exist. With the consolidation of those properties and the resulting proposal before us is 1 driveway, which means that driveway will now turn into curb where it exists right now, and the ability for 1 on-street parking space to be added to the street is provided, because there's not 2 driveways on the property. Instead, there's 1.
So the proposal to add 20 units would not take away any of the neighbors' ability to park in front of their houses?
In fact, through you, Mr. Chair, it adds the ability for 1 on-street parking space through the replacement of that curb.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hobbs?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Ms. O'Connell, I'm just wondering how far up this is built for parking. At what point, like how sub is the parking? Sure. And what is the view from whichever street where the parking entrance is?
You can see on this elevation, the bottom right-hand corner is the rear of the property, and it's not totally evident there, but at its maximum, because grade varies on each side of the property, the parking garage extends above grade 1.4 meters, so that's at its highest point in the rear yard. We'll deal with how that's treated through the site plan control process, but right now we're proposing a combination of ivy potentially to cover that, as well as a fence surrounding the property on all sides. And the amenity space in the rear yard as well has been set back significantly from the adjacent neighbors. So it is raised on top of the parking garage, but they've shown a balcony significantly set back to reduce any privacy impacts on adjacent properties.
So is this, I'm not quite sure about this type of building or this area in particular, but is this subject at all to infill guidelines that have restrictions as to garage, where the garage door is and so on?
It's actually outside of the area under the new infill bylaw.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, Councillor Fleury.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. Maybe I'd like to hear from the department relating to the vision for the area. There are changes to the corridor along Beechwood, and we're seeing more and more building permits for renos in that area, and now we're having an application. So how do we see that street and that area close to Beechwood on the Vanier side transform over the next couple of years, if in fact that's
I think, Mr. Chairman, it's clearly an area that's designated as general urban area, as Ms. O'Connell had noted. It's got an R4 zoning on it today, which is a zoning that accommodates uses range from single-family to low-rise apartments. There is a unit count limitation with respect to low-rise apartments, as I indicated, primarily to reflect sort of the patterning that has occurred in the area in the past, which is predominantly some of the existing fabric being developed with low-rise apartments. In this instance, there is a consolidation that's been affected. This type of development is within the framework of what's contemplated under the R4 zoning with respect to low-rise apartments, notwithstanding that there's an additional number of units that are being introduced, again, as a result of the consolidation to create a larger property. And at the end of the day, under the official plan, there's a lot of direction to making sure that these development, where they do differ from what might exist today, is generally compatible and consistent with the overall framework and character and patterning that we find in the area generally. I think when we looked at this particular development in the context of the larger neighborhood, which does accommodate low-rise apartments, and the attention that's being given to this project to make sure that it integrates and relates and embraces the street, is something that's well within within the framework of the directions that are provided through the official plan. So again, it's an area that you will not see wholesale change, but from time to time, it's not unexpected to see something come forward, and in this instance, we're quite comfortable that this type of a development situation internal to the neighborhood is appropriate. Clearly, the higher intensity, higher profile development activity would be more focused on the edges, in this case along Beechwood Avenue and or Montreal Road. But again, from our perspective, this does fit within the overall directions established by council through its official plan, and fits within the overall directions of the zoning with respect to massive building.
I guess if I simplify my question, does the department feel that the vision is in place for the area of Vanier, and how does this application play into it? I mean, you're speaking of the alignment with regards to our policies, but as an overall area, do we have the visions that's needed before we can look at or looking at an application like this?
I think, Mr. Chairman, the official plan does set the overall vision, and it's the policy direction that establishes that. If there's a sense that we should be looking at this differently, then it would really necessitate taking a closer look at this area to determine what should happen. But it's the official plan that really does establish the overall vision and direction. So that's really the direction that we have to look to determine what is or what is not appropriate.
So just in a different, maybe train of thought, so the community really, wants to see something happen out of that site. There's 2 abandoned properties, or there's 2 properties that are problematic currently. There are concerns relating to the amount of units, and I'd like to understand the vision of the department relating to, I realize why we're here today, it's looking at a zoning change. Is there a threshold in the department when you look at number of units? Sure, we're looking at the same frame, the same structure, but is there a reason why there would have been a requirement of 4 units in the first place? And how does the department interpret the changes to that with regards to this application?
I think, Mr. Chairman, I partially responded to that earlier in a question from the chair in terms of sort of the current zoning that exists in the 4-unit limitation. But at the end of the day, we're looking at the overall impact and the ability of the property to accommodate what's being proposed. In this instance, we're satisfied that with the consolidation of 2 properties, the built form completely complies with the zoning with respect to the main building itself as far as setbacks and heights are concerned, so the mass and the volume is allowed. In terms of impacts of that number of units on the area can be supported on the property. The things that we would look to are issues with respect to traffic impact, and there really is not a significant traffic impact that was identified as a result of this project. So again, it's a situation of sort of the massing being allowed and the efficient use of that mass to accommodate the residential intensification objectives of the city generally, and we're comfortable that this property can support and accommodate the 20 units as is being proposed. If it was half the property, it would probably be a different situation, and you'd be looking at a different building form. If there were 3 lots or 4 lots that were consolidated, we might be looking at breaking it up into separate buildings, because then you're introducing a pattern that might not be entirely consistent. But as far as this proposal is concerned, we were satisfied that it fit within the overall frameworks.
I guess to me it's a weird one where, how are we taking the measures? It relates to questions from my colleague about not just about construction, but about the privacy elements relating to the setbacks. The envelope of the building is grosso modo permitted currently in the zoning, but now that they grow to 20 units, there's a new parking requirement, which basically gets them to build the parking structure you're seeing under the property, which brings in a different discussion. Perhaps you'd have the same amount of people in the building, but now with the new parking requirements, it forces them to build that structure. I'd like to hear something relating to, is there not concerns or community impacts or neighborhood impacts relating to that parking ratio requirements under the new units that they're asking for?
And through you, Mr. Chair, I'll just mention that for a lower parking requirement, it's potentially that we would be looking at not an underground parking structure, but actually surface parking in the rear yard. Because of the number of parking spaces required, the applicant has the ability or has proposed to put the parking underground, which in fact I think reduces some of the impacts from that would be more commonly related to a surface parking lot. So impacts such as noise or headlights on adjacent properties or having a paved parking lot in the rear have been minimized through that ability to provide underground parking. So we have looked at that through the process, and certainly the site plan control process will look at elements such as landscaping and where the balcony and edges are located and how the fence is treated to ensure that privacy and impacts on those adjacent uses are reduced.
Thank you. You done, Councillor? Perfect. Councillor Blais.
Thanks. I'm trying to get, do we have other applications that are similar within, say, a kilometer or 2 kilometers of this in terms of increasing density and intensification within Vanier?
I'm not aware of any subject applications at this point for low-rise apartments similar to this. Certainly there's been a lot of development interest in applications on the Beechwood corridor, but this is on this stretch of Marquette, one of the
given that there's significant interest along the Beechwood corridor, and it seems to make sense given the proximity to the downtown and the other things we're trying to achieve, I guess my hope would be, and I didn't see reference to it in this application, or in the report, excuse me, there was no reference to transit and how, whether we consulted with OC Transpo, what the access currently is in the beach. I assume there's OC Transpo on Beechwood and surrounding areas, and it's obviously very close walking to beach, but as we continue to see application in this neighborhood, that will change how we look at, or how OC Transpo looks at providing service, and I think it will be very important as we move forward to better discuss or coordinate with OC Transpo and, as the councillor was alluding to, have perhaps a more concrete plan on how we're going to see growth take place in this part of town.
Absolutely, and through you, Mr. Chair, there's 3 local bus routes that run along Beechwood Avenue, so OC Transpo is circulated as part of the application process, so they're made aware of increased number of units in the area and potential increases.
And they provided no feedback at all during the process?
No comments to the zoning amendment process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Blais. Councillor Quadri.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just coming back to the parking issue, and you mentioned that it adds some height at the back of the building because of the way the property is sloped or draining. Is that really truly classified as underground parking, or is that at-grade parking that could not be hid in the back part of the building?
I guess we could classify it as a partially underground parking structure. Part of it does exist above grade by 1.4 meters. The remainder of it is below grade. So that's the reason that a lot of the performance standards have been amended, because our zoning bylaw considers it as part of the building. And so the requested performance standards have to have been tailored to that structure itself.
And there's no way of getting rid of that, the height in the back at 1.9 meters that you're suggesting for the parking. There's no way of avoiding that height added to the building?
The applicant may be able to comment on that further, but I understand it's a result of some soil conditions in the area at a certain depth.
And the planning department, did they approach the property owner to see if that was possible, or is that you're just suggesting that maybe the property owner could accommodate that?
Yes, certainly through you, Mr. Chair, the ideal situation would be to locate the underground parking completely underground, but in this situation, apparently it's not possible to be able to accommodate it.
Okay, coming back to the question that Councillor Fleury was asking about fitting into the neighborhood or fitting onto the streetscape, did we look at the compatibility of this project in the neighborhood more than the fact that it would just nicely fit in or would fit in?
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair, I did undertake a site visit and examine the type of dwelling units that exist in the area currently. Flat roof style dwellings are not uncommon in this area, and we've looked significantly at the design, and the applicants made design changes based on our comments and feedback related to compatibility in the area. certain measures in terms of the design. The applicant or the proposal breaks up the massing in terms of a vertical element, so it's divided it vertically to give the appearance of smaller properties. There's a large amount of transparency with the relationship with the street, with the amount of glazing on the front of the property. They provided balconies and moved the front entrance to be more reflective of the existing pattern in the area. So we have looked at the design. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions from members of committee? Nope. Councilor Sherry, I'm going to ask you to give up your seat there so that we can go to delegations, if you don't mind. Or you can move to, oh, sorry, why don't you stay there? We've moved public delegation to the other side. You're good. Sorry about that. Usually public delegations are here, and now, you know, you're away for a couple of weeks and they just change everything. Yeah, you know, the game's almost over. I don't even know why they need to throw me off. Okay, our first... Oh, Councillor Harder has a question, and then we'll go to delegations.
This may be more something I should ask the applicant, but, you know, just in listening to what other people are saying around the table and following up on Councillor Kadri, I'm just wondering about the ability to create a green roof so that it would, even though the grade is higher, you know, is that something through site plan, I would imagine, that you would be doing? But is that something that would be possible in this location? And then are you comfortable with the issues of drainage? Because that's another question that I personally have.
Through you, Mr. Chair, grading and drainage will be examined and have been examined by our departmental engineer as part of the process. So the application won't be permitted to drain on adjacent properties, for instance, and impact them in that way. I think there is an amount of green landscaping that will be proposed on that amenity space above the parking garage, so we will be looking at that closely through the site plan control process.
Well, note to the applicant, when you come forward, I'm going to want to hear some conversation on what that would look like, rather than have a concrete, you know, hill, if you will, beside the people that live close by. I'd like to know that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Karen Barber. Oh, there you are. Don't even have to call you up.
Okay. Okay. This is the first time I've done this. Okay, the developer is asking for 9 zoning bylaws, and one of them is something new that we weren't aware of. And
could you just make sure to pull that mic down and a little closer so we all can hear you?
Okay. How's that? Perfect. Okay, there's 9 zoning bylaw amendments being requested for this area, for these 2 sites. We're concerned about the rezoning exception that was included in the notice for the meeting today. It was never mentioned or never identified in any of the notes or paperwork we received, even in conversations with the councillor and the planner at various meetings. We were concerned about the current zoning. And then all of a sudden, and nothing was mentioned, and all of a sudden in this report, it's now saying they want an exception to include 20, and it showed even XXX, which we didn't know what it was until I did some research to find out what this XXX was. So basically it's to provide a maximum of 20 units. We're all opposed to this site or proposal. The residents really would accept an 8-unit versus a 20-unit. We agree with development in the area. It's great. It will bring more, better area. The developer acknowledges that the site doesn't even conform to a 16-unit building, as the lot is too small. And then the city standards for infill and everything states that conversions, which is under the new infill, which I have the report, which cross-references with the bylaws for new bills, states that they must comply with the same rules as new bills, or that new bills should, in respect to lot area, lot height, width, and that the requirements include minimum lot size, which they're not meeting for the minimum lot size. This out-of-scale development is not compatible to the area. As you can see in a photo that was provided to us in a report from the developer, this house or this apartment is so bulky amongst all the houses along Marquette Avenue. They want to bring the building forward in regards to the setbacks, which will block the views of other residences. And then the parking is a real big issue because they've got 10 in total, including one visitor parking. And so the problem is for the winter, the parking, because the city is allowed to provide 65% of parking permits on the street. And with the snow removal in the winter, this will cause problems. What else? The Optimist Park is just a couple of houses down from there. And this, and there's like, there's, where is it? There's, oh, wow, calm down, eh? There's a basketball court, there's swings and slides for the kids. It's very family orientated. And by having such an excess of parking would cause these families who want to go and spend time at the park, it will cause problems that they will need to park further. The downfall to the building is that, the size of the building. This type of building should be on a main road, like on Beach Road or whatever, or on a street that has 3-story buildings. This whole street is all residential, is all family street. And even in the report that was issued on March 3rd in regards to conversions and new bills and everything, it states right in there, building of this, the zoning permits a maximum of 4 units per property, not 20 units as per the conversion report dated March 3rd. The report reiterates that, quote, it is perhaps worth noting that our 1, 2, 3, and our 4A to 11 zones have explicit limits on the number of dwelling units. In this case, it would be 4 units. And then to add an exception to the report just the other day isn't fair and transparent for us. We feel that the residents should be given an opportunity, and now we realize the reason why it was reduced from 22 to 20 was to be able to provide this exception to the area. Our area, this type of infill does not fit the area whatsoever. Another issue pertaining to the development is they're saying the site plan isn't included, but it is part of that's going to affect the neighbor. And the reason why this is going to affect the neighbor is because part of the plan is to request that the hedges on the man next door who's been there for over 40 years, they want these hedges removed in order to be able to put the laneway in. We've been advised that this is part of the site plan control, but this should be something that is considered within this amendment process, because it is all part of it, so it should be considered because it has an adverse effect on the neighbor. And what else? I think that's it. Oh yes, and the other thing is the way the property is, you've got the laneway whose ramps down to a parking lot, and then you have another ramp on the right-hand side that leads to the backyard for walking. In their site plan, it shows that all the bicycle racks are at the front of the building, which was issued the other day in part of the report. And that is another quality that it reduces the area. As well, in their planning report, again, that was submitted, the revised one, it only shows 19 units. There was a lot of discrepancies in this report, and we feel that we weren't advised properly on this whole project. Okay. And we would like to see that this does not proceed, that it be revised to an 8-unit like the area states, because none of the area, I could have taken pictures, the whole area, there's no big building like that. It's all residential. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there questions for the delegation? Councilor Chiarelli?
All right, well, if this building isn't acceptable, what type of intensification in that area do you think the community is prepared to accept?
Well, an 8-unit would be ideal, because you have the same style. There's been within the area, there has been new units developed, which are 8 units or 4 units on double properties. This type would be ideal for the area because it would blend in with the area. Even currently, what's there is there's such big windows that doesn't even meet the quality or the style of the area, but we feel that an 8-unit would be ideal for the area.
Are you good? Okay. Any other questions for the delegation? Thank you very much for your presentation. Karen Henning, if Ms. Henning's like to come up.
Hi. Karen mentioned most of the points. I'll just add to it. Having children on the street at 133 Marquette, I'm very concerned about the safety of the children, especially around the park area. It's a very busy area. There's a lot of busy play going on, and I'm very concerned about the extra parking spots that are being taken up for the residents there not being able to have parking as well, and people visiting the park not being able to have parking spots. Like I said, it's a safety issue for me, and I feel that the area, that two-house zone is being exploited. And I know that the same company across Beechwood has built a much smaller, very nice building on Putnam. And I don't know why they're trying to build a 20-unit building on my street, my residential street. Thank you.
Okay. Are there questions for the delegation? Thank you very much for your presentation. Hughes Renault. Mr. Renault, if you'd like to come up.
Yeah, so my having to say is pretty much the same as she just said. I was very happy when I seen these buildings going for sale, because one's a house with a family in it, good people. Next house is a rooming house. That one there, that looks like it's falling apart. When I bought my house across the street, right across the street from that house, my wife says to me, "Why you buy that? Look at the people there, blah, blah, blah." I don't want to be judgmental. I said, "Don't worry. I finish the house, I buy that house, I'll demolish it and make a nice house with it." So now we're looking at this building coming. Is going to dwarf everything around. There's, no denying. You can look at measurements and say whatever. It's not going to change anything. It's going to be a big, bulky building there with basically, we're going to go from, I don't know how many rooms there is in that house, but we're going to go to another rooming house, just a little bigger.
Okay.
Across the street, like she said, on the other side on Beechwood, they build nice buildings, and then they come across here in Vanier, and then they build that. So, I don't think there's anybody in the neighborhood that wants it, period. I don't know how many people is here today from the neighborhood, but I know there's quite a few, and nobody wants it. Karen said, an 8-unit would be nice. Sure, 8 units better than 20, but all the same, if you're going to have some family like myself and my neighbors and so on and so forth and make a nice neighborhood, 8 units, my lot is half of that, and we're 1 unit, 1 family. I don't think I have such a big backyard that's outrageous, and my children have a little backyard to play in, and that's nice.
Okay, so is there anything else, sir, you'd like to add?
Well, I hope hope you don't agree with what they plan to do, and that's all I got to say.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Councillor Hubley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if you've seen this picture. I think it was part of the report or something that we've been circulated. You said you bought your house on the street, you live on the street. Would you agree that this proposal is compatible to anything else on the street? Because it sounds to me like it's all 4, 6, or 8.
No, it doesn't look like anything down the street.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Is that it? Is that it, Councillor? Yeah, okay. Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation, sir. Jeanette Gallin, if you'd like to come up.
Hello. I wanted to follow up those last two, or the last three actually, residents from the street by explaining again that these pictures are very biased. If you look at the current picture of those two residential houses side by side with these drawings, you'll see that the scale is very different. This looks very spacious. The grayscaling between the sidewalk, the street, and the driveway makes it look like it's a very spacious area that actually does not belong to the property. So, again, I would invite you to flip back and forth between the current residential houses and this drawing and see that it's actually not realistic for it to be so spacious with so much space on either side or in the back. The other point I would like to make is that this would be a rental building of 22 units, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with the nature of Vanier, but there's a lot of small-scale rentals, 1, perhaps 2 units, mostly in residential houses, and this would create a vacuum effect for those other types of rental properties. My concern is that there has been no study done if there is even a need for a 22-unit rental building on this street, so it's all hypothetical. It does not fit the character or the profile of the street, which is why we're all here as neighbors. There is other development going on in the neighborhood. The reason we're against this is because it is different from the other ones. It is in the middle of the residential street, not at an intersection, not at the end of the street, not on the main street. Marquette exits out to Beechwood. And so it neither fits the character of the street nor the types of residential and rental properties that are in the neighborhood. It would be the first type of building like this, not just, I believe, in the street, but in the entire area. I believe you could hear in the last presenter's voice, perhaps, that the residents feel a little insulted, and it appears to us that this is nothing but speculative real estate investment of someone who wants to capitalize on the proximity of these lots to Beechwood Avenue and downtown without wanting to pay the price for a lot, let's say on Beechwood Avenue, that such a building would appropriately house.
Okay. I just want to clarify one thing. I'm going to ask you a question. This is the existing is an R4 zone, right?
That's correct.
So I could build that building as of right now if I met the performance standards and I only put 4 units in it.
That's correct.
Okay. So then I'm going back to you. So the existing zoning really doesn't suit you because you don't like this building, regardless of how many units are in it, because all you've talked about most recently is the side yards, the scope. So really, for you, doesn't matter how many residents are in this building, that building that's permitted under the zoning now is unacceptable to you.
What we're saying is the number of units, first of all, as I mentioned, it's residential units.
So is it the building and the scale and the scope, or is it the number of units that is the real issue here? Because I'm having trouble understanding. Right. And fair enough, you're switching between, you're using every tool in your toolkit to say, I don't like this, and I'm having trouble figuring out what it actually is you don't like.
So it is both. There is no other such building in the neighborhood of 22 units.
Okay.
And then I want to touch on the other one as well.
So the 20 units is one.
Right. And the other one is the nature of the building. Now, they say that it's going to be a spacious driveway and it will accommodate all the cars coming in and out, but it actually, they're applying for an amendment to come closer to the city line up front. Now, I spoke to the gentleman who lives right next to this proposed building, and that would mean that he would not be able to see as clearly the traffic passing by, making it more awkward for him to pull out of his driveway. So it's the look, it's the functionality, it's all of it that is the nature of the building that we're having issues with. The residents don't really come out in such numbers opposing new construction, but just the fact that the character of the building, the numbers, and the functionality of the building does not fit into the neighborhood, including the park, the children, the pool, the parking, the other people coming out of their driveway. It sort of makes everybody takes a step back in their own home, and the functionality is the actual concern.
So, okay. I'm just trying to, so if I came in and was building this building, just the way it looks right now, it's not something that you would support?
No.
Okay.
No.
Even, now, if I had 4 units in it and it looked like that, and I had 8 cars, because 2 cars per unit, is that something you'd support?
We do want those 2 lots to be developed clearly. As you can see, there are houses that are collapsing.
I guess I'm trying to get at, is it that building, regardless of what it has in it, or is it what it has in it that is the problem?
It is the size, and I'd like to give you an example. The property that my family owns on Marquette, when it was built, it was, for some reason, due to a mistake, and I just want to give you an example, built too close to the city line. The house had to be picked up and moved back. This is clearly a huge expense, a huge inconvenience. There was no exception to the rule. Here they're applying for the property to be closer to the city line to be able to accommodate more units. So that just tells you the nature of the construction.
Councilor Blais?
I was going to ask this question the same way, because as I understand it, they're more or less allowed to build this now, and the change is, would it be okay with 4 units or 8 units at 2,000 square feet instead of 20 units at 500 square feet or whatever they are?
So again, we don't like the amendment to come closer to the city line when nobody else can and could. We do not like the densification, and as we understand, that 20-unit number got recently increased. So I'm not sure how many units were allowed before this proposal came out, or when it was changed, or how that happened.
So I think you're going to have I think your problem is going to be more people are going to build under the R4 zoning, and it's not going to be but anyway, you're going to have to...
Well, that's exactly what I was going to...
That's a future issue for you to deal with, because the zoning exists today to allow a similar scale of building, regardless of the number of units inside it, and we're hearing clearly they don't like the size, regardless of how many units are in it.
Right.
Exactly. And we've heard that through this application. The department's aware that, a lot of things we've done relating to infill 1 and infill 2 would also relate to some of the challenges we're having in terms of density.
I'm not sure we'd get rid of that building.
Not under the R4.
Not under the R4. Right. Exactly. Okay. Sorry, ma'am. Are we finished with the delegation? Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
The last speaker on this one is Brian Casagrande. Mr. Casagrande, if you'd like to come up.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of committee. My name is Brian Casagrande. I'm a senior planner with FOTEN Consultants. I'm the planning consultant on this file. I just wanted to respond to a few of the comments that I heard as I was listening to the public delegations. The first is I want the committee to understand that very early in this process, we took the time to consult with the community association heads, consult with the community, consult with the local councillor, and we were very clear in our public meeting about the number of variances, if you will, or deviations from the zoning, that this did need a zoning amendment or a committee of adjustment application to deal with those, but our preference, given the degree and the complexity, was to come before planning committee. And so, we heard a lot of concerns in that meeting. We tried our best to respond to as many of them as we could, working closely with the department on what they felt was necessary in terms of being able to support this proposal that's before you. There's definitely a site plan process that's going to continue ultimately, and we're going to work towards elements such as screening of that rear enclosed parking element as best we can. And I think, Mr. Chair, you really touched, and others of the committee really touched on the issue at hand here, and we experience this more and more as we look at opportunities for infilling in the general urban area in the inner city. There's clearly compatibility criteria in the official plan that look to, providing development that looks to its context for appropriateness. But oftentimes you're dealing with R4 zones, and these R4 zones permit a fair degree of height, which would actually be higher than what's proposed before you, and a fair degree of density within that effective box. And however you put that, articulate the density in the box, you can get effectively the same number of people. So, we've got an application before you for 20 units, many of which are two-bedroom units. But, for example, we could do a stacked townhouse dwelling on this property that could have larger units and more bedrooms in it and effectively achieve the same. The stacked townhouse, by example, in the zoning bylaw permits 8 units. You've been referencing 4, Mr. Chair, and it is accurate for a low-rise apartment. But if we simply designed it differently, we could have more units and then demise them differently. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be effectively the same form of development. And that form of development, if one were to consolidate lots along this corridor, could be reproduced in whatever form you'd like it to be, but the boxes, if you will, would be the same or effectively greater because of the height that we've tried to reduce on this proposal. I think it's appropriate development and planning for this location. You're in close proximity to a transit priority corridor, which is an area where the city's anticipating and promoting a certain degree of intensification and growth. We're concealing all of the parking and putting it basically behind the building. And the zoning changes that were before you on are really related to, predominantly to that parking structure that we've worked hard to try and depress as much as possible, and will continue to work in terms of concealing it so that it's really not creating any impacts on the adjacent properties. I know my client at the early stages of this proposal consulted with a lot of people, and there was a lot of support, and there continues to be a lot of support articulated to him for this development. The existing property, when he took it over, was deplorable, to say the least. And I think at the end of the day, this is a development that the city is going to be proud of.
Okay. Are there questions for Mr. Casagrande? Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When you say you could build like 8-story and so on with the existing, are we talking about with the existing setbacks as well? Because what I'm hearing from the residents, that's one of the problems with this, is the fact that this report is taking away all those setbacks, and we're going right to the lot line. And if I look at this picture that's provided, you're also going outside the lot line.
We're not allowed to go outside the lot line.
Well, what's this building on the side of the line that's provided in your picture?
That's not his picture.
There seems to be some sort of thing attached to the side.
I mean, that image that you're pointing to is an image that we produced for the community in the public meeting. It's not, the plan has actually changed since then to bring that element within the required or the requested setbacks. But that red box, if you will, that's a zoning box. It's not a property box, if you will. So the projection that you're seeing is not going beyond the property, but beyond what the normal setbacks would have been. So to answer your first question is that the underground parking structure, as it goes towards the rear and has to emerge slightly above grade, is the element that is actually requiring some release relative to the setbacks. The only exception to that is the front of the building. The front of the building, we're seeking to go to 3 meters instead of 6, which is the normal setback. However, the zoning bylaw actually allows you to take the averages of your adjacent properties and come to meet in line with them. So if we simply focused on that as an existing performance standard, we would have been at 3.8 meters, and we're asking for 3. So yes, there is a little bit of relief sought on the front facade, but keep in mind that the building height is actually below the permitted building height, is an offsetting element to that.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, I agree with you. I saw the existing building, and it needs to be, something needs to happen there, so thank you.
Okay. Councillor Harder?
Even though it is going to be, if this is passed, a site plan topic for discussion, if you heard me earlier, I was talking about the ability for, and you just said to Councillor Hubley about, doing your best to alleviate the raised platform of the roof of the garage. What about having it as a green roof and having that space? I know that Councillor Holmes has always been a huge supporter of green roofs, and I think that this would be an opportunity where it takes back a backyard rather than what would have happened if you had a normal situation with parking where you would have had an asphalt pad where cars parked. Could you actually turn this into a space that became more friendly, for sure, and more usable to the people that are going to live there?
I think
how could we ensure that would happen?
Well, certainly your planning staff are here to hear this clearly, and we're here to hear it as well. What I can tell you preliminarily is that the intention is to green it as much as possible. So the question is how you green it, right? So certain things like ivy that don't have a huge weight-bearing issue or a soil capacity need are easy elements that can be used to screen. Planters are another example of easy elements. The challenge becomes when you're trying to get a substantial soil base, and then you get into structural issues. So we're definitely prepared to look at that, and I know my client has conveyed that he'd like to look at that, but there's a certain threshold there where the cost prohibition, depending on what you're proposing, becomes problematic. But we definitely will commit to working with staff to try and make it as green as possible.
Because, I mean, I can see the weight of planters, and that sort of option is great as well. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else from Ms. Casagrande? Nope. Thank you very much for your that concludes all of the delegations for this item. So we'll close the public hearing portion of the meeting. We'll turn it back to members of the committee to deliberate on the recommendations. Do you want to provide us with any guidance, Councillor Fleury?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. So there's a couple of elements in my mind we have to look at and that are problematic out of the application. If this building structure was permitted at 4 units, you'd have potentially that building with the zoning changes that are asked, but you wouldn't have that parking structure underneath it, which in some ways is, by the proponent, proposed as a solution, but in a lot of ways for our community is seen as a big issue. If you see that 4th image, so that 4th image, there's that gray portion, which is actually the parking structure that needs to be built. That becomes, under this new parking ratio, under this new, so if you go to 20 units, you're providing 10 to 11 spots under this application, which gets you to build this underground structure. If you build this underground structure, now you have a rear yard that's not paved, But then you have, if you're the rear yard neighbor, if you're any of the side yard neighbors, you have this 1 meter thing that's going to be built. In itself, we can ask for them to green it and so on, and there can be some improvements done through that. But if you look at, just from a building code element, under our building code, they will fence it. The fence would be up to 3 meters. But then if you stand where there's proposing a rear yard, you're standing above your neighbor's rear yard or side yard. So I'm just trying to, through this, show the members of committee the challenges at growing the number of units to this. If you look at the actual building, fine, the R4 zone has its problems, and you'd be perhaps able to build that. But as soon as you allow a growth of unit with the ratio to parking, you're creating that underground parking, which is in some ways seen as a good thing because you're not paving the rear yard, providing the 5 or the 4 parking required under the 4-unit portion of it. But you're changing, and that's what you're hearing from the community, is you're changing the dynamics of the setbacks and then the interaction with the neighborhood. It's not necessarily the building, it becomes the parking structure. Relating to the number of units, we went back and forth with the community and with the planning, with the planner, Erin, who we've gone through consultation. You've heard from the community. The community's been articulating the challenges of the application through different means and really, learning through this because it's been one of the first applications in that area. So there's been a learning curve from the community in terms of what's the language of zoning, what's the language around units, and Erin's done a very good job at spending the time and taking the time to explain that to the community. The challenges are that we have an area where there is single family, there's duplex, there's triplex. There are multi-res, but not to this density as you see in the picture. The R4 zone permits it, but then if you look at the type of units they're providing, they're very similar. There's not 1, 2, 3, a diversity of bedrooms. It's very targeted towards the same type of rental, which creates a different set of challenges. So there are challenges relating to the R4. There are challenges that if committee does look at the increase in units, it triggers a whole lot of challenges that we can't address through site plan. We're looking at it from a zoning perspective today, but it has an impact on what we can do through site plan. I use the fence portion of it. How can we look at it from increasing the size of that fence to protect the privacy of the neighborhood if committee looks at that zoning change? So there are challenges with the application. I'm concerned that there's a lack of vision for that area and that the R4 zone will be used in this regards to over increase the density that is permitted. We want to keep a diverse neighborhood, and we want to keep we want it to be friendly for families, for seniors, and for students and others. But if you only bring the same type of units out of a property like that, and you trigger that down the street, we start having a similar conversation that we've been having in Sandy Hill. In certain ways, because you're offering only the same type of bedrooms.
Right. But if you go down that street and I say, same house, same house, same house, same house, same house, same house.
No,
yeah. You can't say I want a diversity, yet I'm going to stay with exactly what I had before, right?
Fair enough. The community has said, though, that the existing properties need to go. They want to see something new, but they want to see something that fits the scale, and that's a discussion that we want to have with the department relating to the R4, relating to the vision of the community. Fair.
That's right.
In terms of this application, granting the increase in number of units triggers a whole lot of issues, and I've identified a couple of them relating to parking, for example.
Mr. Chairman, clearly the zoning bylaw sets out the requirements for parking. Clearly, increasing the number of units increases the amount of parking that's being required to be provided on the property. I think the corollary to that also is recognition that we do not have maximum parking requirements set out. So even if it was, and I mean, this is all hypothetical discussion that we're getting into now, but even if you have 8 units and they end up being condominiumized and you're providing 2 parking spaces per unit, you might end up in the same situation. I mean, like I said, this is entirely hypothetical. What we are looking at is a rental building that's being proposed. We do not see a lot of rental buildings being proposed within the city. They do not typically have the same parking requirement. There is a minimum requirement that needs to be met per the zoning bylaw. And I think as Ms. O'Connell had indicated, and I'm satisfied that we'll be working with the applicant to address the issues of the half in-ground parking structure, but at the end of the day, having a parking structure, in fact, in my mind, is a better solution than a surface parking lot in the back, because you, in fact, have an opportunity to deal with something on the roof of that parking structure, which is not incredibly high. It's about 1 meter or 1.2 meters off the ground, so it's about the height of a fence that you would typically find. So I think we can deal with it through the site plan process. And again, I think as the councillor has acknowledged, the R4 zone does allow this form. The real question is the number of units, and whether or not 20 units is appropriate for this property, whether this property can accommodate 20 units in an acceptable manner. I think from a departmental point of view, we're satisfied that it can, but that's, I think, at the end of the day, what's before this committee to make a decision on.
Right. But if it was 8 units and I provided 8 parking spots plus 2 visitors, now I'm at 10. I'm 2 away from the 12 that they're requesting.
Exactly, Mr. Chairman. So you potentially be dealing with the exact same situation that you're dealing with right now.
Right. So what's the solution? Is it reducing reducing the number of units to 8, and the applicant provides a parking spot for each of them, plus 2 visitors, and you're back in the same situation, right?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
So how do you solve that? How do you solve that dilemma to respond to Councillor Fleury's issue? Do you reduce the parking requirement?
And I think that's, I mean, clearly we're not advocating oversupply parking, but clearly that there is a market demand, particularly when you're into condominiums, and we're not there yet where the City of Toronto is, for example. There is still a requirement for the saleability of units to have parking provided for those units.
It's usually 1 spot per.
That's right. I mean, within our key intensification zones around mixed-use centers, we do put in place maximums. We don't have maximum parking requirements in other areas. This is one of those areas, so effectively it's the market that will determine what the needs are. And as I indicated, when it comes to ownership, typically you're looking at a market condition where generally there's a desire to provide 1 space per unit. In a rental situation where you're in an inner urban area, close to services, close to transit, the 0.5 parking space requirement typically is more than adequate to accommodate the needs that would be associated with those new residents moving into that building. So it is a dilemma. I mean, it's something I think that needs to get looked at more comprehensively on a citywide basis, and we're starting to move in that direction, but clearly this is a big piece that would have to get addressed in a number of different circumstances.
Okay. Any other question? Councillor Kadri?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just coming back to staff on the parking issue, could we have asked, or should we be asking the developer to go deeper into the parking lot underground, so you wouldn't have faced that situation of raised parking in the back or above grade parking in the back? Could that be a possibility?
Mr. Chairman, I'll defer to Ms. O'Connell if she probably has more information, but my understanding is that there would, I mean, clearly the preference would be to try to go down, but my understanding is the soil conditions and subsurface conditions are such that that is not a viable proposition to move forward with. I think what the applicant, from my understanding, has determined is that get it into the ground at least to a point where you have a condition that you can appropriately deal with the edge relationship to adjacent properties. Like I said, I'm not sure, Ms. O'Connell, if she has any further comments to provide with respect to the conditions on this property, whether or not that is in fact possible. I'm sure it was looked at.
It was looked at through you, Mr. Chair, as part of the initial submission. The other element we get into, if you go further underground, is the grade of the ramp has to be increased significantly, and the lot depth becomes creates issues of circulation within that underground parking structure the deeper you go. Just to point that out.
Mr. Chair, coming back to applications like this, it starts off in the front as a 3-story building, and that's what it's going under. And I understand the R4 zone does allow higher building height. But looking at it from a resident's perspective, especially the people that are, backing onto it, now all of a sudden facing a 4.5-story building, maybe not 4.5, but a 4-story building. And they're seeing basically that parking structure. Greening it is an option, yes, but I'm just saying that sometimes we're not going back to the developer and saying, look, I understand the soil conditions and all of that may cost you a little bit more, but at least look at that feasibility and see, going deeper, what is the cost and how much can you mitigate that parking structure even further for the residents that are backing onto it or siding onto it. And that's my concern, because I faced this a couple of years back in my own community where we allowed the above grade parking or grade parking, and then we actually put a covenant in that application to say tell the residents that are moving in that their garages may be flooded because of that decision. And that's not the way to do business in my books. And based on that kind of an application that I had to approve or didn't approve, I was against it, but the committee did approve it, that I'm not going to be supporting this application going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anybody else? Councilor Blaine?
Thanks. I think this application has demonstrated a couple things. One, I think it's pretty clear that given its proximity to the downtown, and as mentioned by staff, there are some other applications perhaps in the hopper, and the presentations from the community, there may not be broad awareness of what is currently allowed. This may be an area that we should think about a community design plan for. So I'm wondering, Ms. Sneddon or whoever should answer this, where this could possibly fit in vis-a-vis your thinking in terms of a work plan over the next several years.
Word of caution, don't call it a community design plan, because community design plans are engines of growth.
Sure.
So they're more dense and more intense than I think Councillor Fleury actually is envisioning.
Fair enough.
So it's something else.
Sure.
So, and I just want to be careful, because words are...
In Cumberland Village, we didn't do a community design plan. We did a visioning process with the community so that the community could better understand what the options and potential were in existing, and we coupled that with some minor changes to the secondary plan. So I'm wondering, so something similar to a CDP that is not an engine of growth to better articulate what our expectations for development in this area might be.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. We are starting to turn our mind to the 2015, 2018 work plan for the department, and certainly for the term of council priorities. So I'm certainly listening to what the discussion has been. We have a number of mechanisms that we could use in terms of trying to look at this area, but it would be something we'd have to, to weigh in terms of a priority and bring it forward to this committee in terms of, when the timing would be possibly to do this.
The other thing it seems too is that the R4 zone is pretty broad. And that might be an understatement, to be sure. So I'm wondering if there's been any thought to reviewing the R4 zone in terms of you might have to create more than one zone, but narrowing on the residential side what the R4 looks like.
Mr. Chair, I would say we haven't turned our mind to that. I mean, you're right, there's R4 zones and various, I would think, sub-zones of the R4. Again, it would have to be something we would include in our work program considerations.
So could this committee make a recommendation without telling the next committee or council what to do, but provide some advice as to what they should more seriously consider in terms of the work plan?
I think that if I look around the table, I mean, I'll leave it to you and to Councillor Harder and to others to advance the items like this into the term of council priorities that you guys are going to set in a
couple weeks,
in 2 months' time. And we could make a recommendation. I'm not sure it's any more.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it really adds value to what your discussions are going to be. That they're your term of council priorities, and I'm not sure that I want to be telling you, hey man, I think this should be your term of council priorities.
So something that has come up is no, I'm not going to go there. Never mind.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm good.
But Councillor, and I'm going to make the assumption that you'll be on planning committee, and that these are. If you want to start to set a framework, you're on the right track in saying, okay, we don't have a lot of policy stuff that we need to do because we need to continue to do our TOD stuff, but these type of things, whether it was the zoning issue that we had in Councillor Tierney's ward, to deal with some of those other emerging issues, a visioning with a companion zoning adjustment might be the way to go, but you have to get that in the term of council priorities, and then you have to make sure that the budget that you get the resources with to do that, and that's that's for the chairman of your new committee to go off and make sure that he or she has the resources that the committee has dictated that it needs to implement those type of things. So, Councillor Hubley.
So if I may, I appreciate your insight into the way forward to deal with the broader issues on the R4 and others that have created this situation. But the matter before us is this application here.
Right.
I'm looking for, if there's a recommendation that you as the chair or Mr. Mosier want to put up on the table now, that we could deal with this in some means to possibly defer this until we get a chance to look at the implications of a review like that.
Yeah.
Before we start changing the landscape of the street in a manner that there's no turning back.
I'm not sure for this particular application that you're going to be able to change its course. I think you will if you deal with it in the first, if you make the R4 zone, however you're dealing with the rest of it, an issue that you'll be able to. But the staff, they have a staff report that is supportive of their application. If you defer, I can't speak for them, but I think Mr. Casagrande would tell you he'd be at the Ontario Municipal Board, and you don't have a policy position that would support making any adjustments to the current report that's before you. And now, I mean, you could reduce the parking requirements to eliminate the need for the parking garage. I'm not sure, does that promote more on-street parking, or is that, unfortunately my advice to you is going to be deal with this application, close it off, make the rest of it a term of council priority, and go back at it this way. The horse is out of the barn. You can try and close the door, but you're not really going to be successful. That would be my advice to you, and I know it's cold comfort to the community and to Councillor Fleury, but that's at this point where you're at. And if you're going to adjust zoning down zone things, Mr. Mark will tell you that that's a very high bar to start to do it, and you can't do it on the fly. You're going to need some direction, like you've talked to, whether it was Councillor Blake called a visioning report or an exercise that gives you a public policy rationale to tap down on that zoning.
And then we wouldn't be putting staff in this position where, according to the rules that are in place today, they have to support an application like this that doesn't do any favors for the neighborhood.
Right, right.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll give you the, Councillor Hobbs, and then do you want to speak to it again, Councillor Blais? Okay, Councillor Tierney.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a few comments about this application in terms of what my colleagues have said, because when you listen to the public delegations, it is about compatibility, and so often that is the issue in the urban area when you're putting the first one in of something. But I think in this case, because this entire area is zoned this way, it probably will just be the first of them, and then it is no longer a big issue of compatibility. But I think one of the things, just reflecting back over 4 years, compatibility is so critical in neighborhoods, and that may be sometimes even down to colors of bricks and so on. And I know in other cities, they get a little bit more involved. Some other cities get a little bit more involved in what the look and feel of places are that are, especially with the first one in, with all these existing low-rise residential houses. And, I just wonder if you could sort of comment about that in terms of, how we deal with that. Is that something that we can deal with an infill guideline if that was expanded, or would we have to do something entirely new?
Mr. Chairman, the infill guidelines will in fact be addressing some of the matters that are really important as it relates to intensification infill within established areas. But I think also we do have guidelines that speak to some of those things, and I think Ms. O'Connell had indicated, and if you look at the images, well, they just got taken off the screen now, but the street edge facade, in fact, is a 3-story street edge facade. The 4-story, in fact, is stepped back. So as you're going down the street, the read of the building will be more a 3-story condition that you're adjacent to, not a 4-story condition. I think when you look at this building, it's also looking to try to pick up on the cadence and the rhythm of the pattern of development along the street. Yes, it is a bigger building, absolutely. It's a double lot, it's not a single lot. But when you just look at the materiality, the vertical and the horizontal lines that are being introduced, it is moving towards picking up on reflecting the rhythm of the existing pattern of development on the street. These are all directions that are set out in the guidelines that Council has approved in terms of how do you deal with ensuring appropriate fit and integration of new development within established areas. As you know, the official plan has a lot of emphasis on compatibility, but it also very clearly states in there that compatibility does not mean identical to what exists in an area. There's a whole bunch of techniques that can be used to achieve compatibility. At the end of the day, it's all about how well does it fit and work with the established characteristics of a community. And there's a number of things that we look to inform us and to make those decisions and discussions that we have with proponents. Design is very much a key element of the things that we're interested in today. The infill will help, absolutely, but I think you also have a good selection of guidelines that are also very helpful. And I think, as this committee has noted, and I think as the councillor has noted, it's the zoning in this area that allows this form of development to occur. And we're working within those parameters to the greatest extent that we can with all the tools that council has approved to ensure that these things do fit well. And at the end of the day, the recommendation from the department is before you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Smith.
Councillor Tierney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And your reference about horse out of the barn, at least they get to see the horse, unlike what happened in my situation where magically overnight this giant building started appearing. In this case, we're talking about a Clydesdale here. There's a big horse, so at least we see it. Good news. I'm less concerned about the semantics of this situation, whether you call it CDP or a vision document, whatever you want to do. I'm looking for some kind of guidance here. I think we need more time with this file. It's one of those things, especially when it comes to the zoning side of things.
where I've experienced, and thankfully we had a very seasoned chair to help me stick handle and navigate that and change it so the rest of the community wasn't affected. But this time we have an opportunity. We actually see it coming this time, rather than it being built and then getting it flagged. So I'm looking to staff, is there any opportunity for, again, I don't care if it's called CDP or a vision document, to defer this? Because it's not leaving a lot of options here. I mean, the only other option is to vote against this.
Mr. Chairman, I think the chair had spoken to that already. I mean, the decision is with committee. You can defer, but we do have a staff report that is now a public document. The applicant does have certain rights in terms of having an application, having a decision rendered on that application. Given the timeline that the application was filed, and Mr. Mark can advise on this as well, there are rules and the applicable policies that would have to get looked at relative to where this to go to the OMB, what in fact would be looked at. So anything that might be coming subsequent to today in terms of adjustments or new policy direction, very informative, can be helpful, but how much weight at the end of the day will that really hold? So, I mean, the application is clearly with this committee to make a decision on. Deferral is an option. I'm not sure how far that's going to get you.
So I would suggest that rather than deferral, if you feel that strongly, you should vote against it. And then that lays, and that deals with this one. It either carries or it fails, and then you can, and it will chart its own course, whether it's to the board or to some other resolution, and then you can deal with the rest of the items that are before you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Is there anybody else who wants to get on this before I give Councillor Fleury the last word? Okay. Over to you, Councillor Fleury.
So to the chair's point, I would encourage my colleagues to vote against it. It demonstrates the challenges of the area, the challenges of the R4 zone, the challenges we have around parking ratios. I think that with the support of my colleagues, we'll be able to look at these challenges with this new term of council. It remains that right now we're having issues with this property, and obviously the growth in the units and the triggering effect to parking and other elements of the site are problematic to the neighborhood. They're problematic to the neighbors and provide no resolution because of the existing allowable features in the R4 zone.
Okay, thank you very much. So to give members of committee an opportunity to vote yea and nay on it, I'll call yeas and nays for that.
This file is going to
10th of December. Okay. Council, you want to know when it goes to council, right? 10th of December. So, anybody else? No? Okay, so we're going to call yeas and nays on that, and we'll start with Councillor Hubley.
No.
Councillor Blais?
Yes.
Councillor Hobbs?
Yes.
Councillor Tierney?
No.
Councillor Shirelli?
Yes.
Councillor Manette?
No.
Councillor Blois?
Yes.
Councillor Cadre?
No.
Councillor Harder? And myself, yes. Okay, that carries. So that item has been dealt with. We're going to move on. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to item number 14. So members of committee, before we leave, let me just give you some guidance on how we're going to deal with this issue. As you know, this zoning bylaw implements in large measure, well, implements in all measure, the policies in our official plan. There are a number of motions that are coming forward, a number of concerns that in order to be effective, are going to require us to amend the official amend the official plan to actually achieve what some councillors are going to do. So rather than try and deal with all of that today and give direction, we're going to hear from delegations, we're going to hear from individual councillors and their motions, and we're going to give Ms. Sneddon those motions and a direction to report back to the next council with the next council, as in 2015 to 2018, the next global group, to be able to actually implement that change. So the direction that you'll have is to report on the effect of the motion, to report on the requirements, what requirements are necessary to amend the official plan, to actually implement what the motion says. Because at the end of the day, what's going to happen is you may change the zoning on the site, but you won't change the policy imperative, which will allow someone to make that application, and you'll be back in the same position that you're in today, arguing without a solid policy rationale. And we want to give the incoming council, so to just survive, the opportunity to make those corrections. So that's what we're going to do, and as a result, we'll hold the hearing today, we'll wrap everything up, we'll refer it to Ms. Sneddon, and she'll come back in the second meeting in February, January, second meeting in January. Let's give us some, let's say first meeting in February, just to give everyone time, and that way all of the incoming councillors can be aware of not only what needs to change on the zoning side, but what they have to do on the OP side to actually do the motions that we're going to hear today actually want to do. So unless that's causes any of my colleagues grief, that's acceptable. That's the same way we've handled all of our other major policy initiatives to make sure that we dot the I's and cross the T's. All right? Okay. Perfect. Ms. Sneddon, do you want to walk us through what we're doing today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations to the committee on your last meeting, and more particular to the chair. You will definitely be missed, so thank you. We're here happy to present our zoning studies report today. Staff have consulted over the past 2.5 years through the Building a Livable Ottawa program that you're familiar with, and staff have more recently consulted in the past year on the zoning studies to implement those OP directions. I know I don't always take time to thank folks, but we certainly had quite a team put together in order to implement this within a 1-year time frame. This really was a tall order, and we had to reorganize our staff in order to be able to achieve this. So I do want to thank the team: Tim Mormon, Carol Ruddy, Emily Davies, Steve Gauthier, Robin Vandelin, Andrew McCrate, Beth Demaray, and Julia Boswell. They were led, and of course the table's not large enough to bring everyone to the table today, so they were led by Mr. Brower beside me and Mr. Miguelez, who we'll be hearing from today. So this zoning report that is before you will be stimulating economic development for our city. It will reduce spot rezonings and will provide certainty for our residents and development industry. As we know, we have a number of speakers lined up and motions to discuss, and thank you, Chair, for pointing out how we would like to move this forward. The only key message that I would like to leave with the committee before I turn the presentation over is that the zoning report before you implements fully Council's direction with the official plan. So this is what is before you, the zoning that will implement those OP policies. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Miguelez.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sneddon, Mr. Chairman, members of committee. Zoning turns 50 this year in Ottawa. The first zoning bylaw was adopted in 1964, and the order that we received at the beginning of this year was to bring zoning in conformity with the official plan. In a lot of ways, we're bringing zoning forward half a century. When zoning was first created, it was designed to do a whole bunch of very different things than what we wanted to do today, and our job was to keep the good things about zoning, which are to give clear rules and set expectations and treat properties equally on a level playing field, and implement the directions of the official plan. And so, as Ms. Sneddon referred to, Our zoning work this year focused on intensification target areas that appear in the Transportation Master Plan as transit priority areas. It builds on the consultation of the official plan, and it aligns COP with the zoning with the official plan. What we focused on were areas that are designated as target areas for intensification in the official plan. So 3 mixed-use centers and town centers, 8 traditional main streets, 8 arterial main streets. We're basically covering about 100 kilometers worth of street frontage and about 4,000 properties. So this is quite a significant package. What you're going to see is that we are aligning zoning bylaw regulations in 3 different ways. One is dealing with building heights, minimums and maximums. We are dealing with permitted uses, so how properties get to be used. And we're dealing with creating good active street frontages for the streets where we want to invest in transit. The marching orders that we received, Mr. Chairman, were to create certainty, reduce spot rezoning, improve the public realm, and support the use of public transit, and we believe that this package achieves those. Just to look at the map, you have here the designations where Council has voted in the official plan to direct intensification. So the purple areas you see on the map are the mixed-use centers, the town centers in Orleans, Barrhaven, and Canada. And the lines are the network of main streets. It's a connected network, and it takes people from one neighborhood to the next along a mixed-use corridor where you have a diversity of activity, a diversity of building stock, and a lively public realm where the transit is. This is the Transportation Master Plan. So as you well know, red is rail and blue is bus. You can see the corridors of the Confederation Line, the Trillium Line, and the other major rapid transit corridors or transit priority corridors that are anticipated in the Council-approved Transportation Master Plan to 2031. Our zoning review areas, basically, if you overlay them on top of this map, will show, first of all, the mixed-use centers and the downtown. You see the main streets, so these are the main streets that we're dealing with. You see the arterial main streets, which are the outward extension of the denser walkable core that we have in the center of the city. And then you have the areas that Mr. Collins' group has been studying in conjunction with the arrival of the Confederation Line Phase 1. So you have the locations that are near the stations that will be served by rail rapid transit in 3.5 years. And our review basically completes the picture and adds the streets and hubs that basically address the more high priority investments that the city is preparing to make in transit. So that was the logic behind the areas that we focused on. I'll now turn it over to Mr. Brower for a little bit more of the detail of what is in front of you.
Thank you very much. The public engagement component of the zoning review really builds on the Building Livable Ottawa consultation process that began over 2 years ago. In terms of the required notification for this project, it really moved forward in 3 main waves. In the spring, notification was given to community groups of the project and of the public consultation sessions by email and was advertised in the newspapers. Following the June public open houses, series of 3 of them, we provided formal notice of the project in the newspaper and circulated the draft amendments for comment over the summer by email to community groups. The comment period closed mid-August, and following that we made a number of revisions to our proposed zoning, leading up to our notification of this meeting before Planning Committee, which was provided in the newspaper by email and by mail. Because of the size of the geography covered by the project and the number of properties involved, we have a number of additional public engagement methods used. We developed a project website that was updated regularly and provided general information about the project as well as specific to each of the 20 project areas, including maps of proposed zoning. Every landowner within the review areas received a letter in the mail about our project, announcing it and talking about public consultation. The same messaging was sent out by a buck slip flyer to everybody in the review area with 400 feet or 120 meters of the boundary. Flyers left at community centers. We gave regular notices by email. Several presentations to community associations as well as BIAs. And we set up a newsletter to give subscribers regular updates. To summarize the consultation by the numbers, we provided over 20,000 notices, and that resulted in over 5,000 people participating in the project this year, either by visiting our website, by participating in project meetings, or by subscribing to our newsletter. So in terms of the recommended changes, our official plan policies for mixed-use centers and which are being implemented or recommended as part of the review would permit buildings of up to 12 stories in height, would require a minimum height of 4 stories for office and residential, and support a broad range of land use. In terms of the building height, where an existing zone allowed for less height than 12 stories or 40 meters, our general recommendations have been to increase that height to 40 meters. If a greater height exists in existing zoning, we've left that height in place as it's in accordance with official plan policy. It's recommended to delete the maximum floor space index requirements of the mixed-use center zone. That's a mechanism used to restrict or regulate the volume of built space on a property. And the reason for that is we'd like to give opportunity for each property to reach its full potential in terms of density opportunity. Generally, where properties were not within a mixed-use center zone, our recommendations have been to change that zone to support broader land use. And in cases where there was a council-approved secondary plan, we're using those documents as more specific guidance for our recommendations. This is a photo example of the Tunney's Mixed-Use Center. It's an image looking at the corner of Parkdale and Oxford Street. It gives the committee and the public an idea of the types of mixed-use buildings that we see establishing over time in all of the mixed-use centers, mid-rise to low high-rise. It's a picture of the same buildings along Oxford Street looking east. Shows a different use on the ground level in office and residential on upper stories. A little further along at Holland Cross, this is at the corner of Scott and Holland. Again, mixed-use buildings, office with different use on the ground floor, street-oriented buildings, and in the case of the building at the back, residential above. On to traditional main streets, the existing official plan policies permit a building of up to 6 stories in height and also support a broad range or full mix of permitted uses. The existing traditional Main Street zoning already provides for a 6-story building height or a maximum height of 20 meters, so there's no changes proposed to that zone. Along the corridors where properties are not already within a traditional Main Street zone, generally our recommendations have been to rezone those into the TM zone, traditional Main Street, or a TM subzone, again to support that broader range of use. There were several secondary plans and CDPs that provided guidance in the traditional Main Street areas, and those informed our decisions and recommendations to committee today. Just a couple photo examples. This is one on Preston Street, and it shows a successful transition of what was formerly a fully residential building and now includes in the lower right-hand corner a small business. It shows how the TM zoning, the mixed-use zoning, can support retention of existing building stock by actually providing for a smaller office or business commercial space within the existing building. Another example on 4th Ave, I believe this one is a wine bar, and shows a good example of how ground floor of a residential building can be used for a very successful commercial operation. Onto the main streets, the official plan permits in the arterial Main Street designation buildings of up to 9 stories in height along the full corridor, and at specified nodes up to 12 stories, but by way of site-specific zoning bylaw amendment. Through the zoning review, we're only recommending a change to permit 9 stories, as the 12 would have to proceed separately. The existing AM zone permits buildings of 8 stories in height at a maximum of 25 meters. Our recommendation is to change that zone to align with the official plan and permit 9 stories at 30 meters in height. Again, as with the mixed-use centers, our recommendation is to delete the maximum floor space index regulations to permit full density opportunity on the properties along those corridors. In general, our recommendations have been to change non-AM zones to an AM zone or an AM subzone, again, to make sure there's broad use permissions. One of the things we're proposing as part of the review is a brand new active frontage street zone, and that would be applied to most properties along all of our arterial main streets that are subject to minimum density requirements in the official plan. In our case, that's 8 of the 9 arterial main streets before committee today. That new AM subzone has the same height and land use permissions as the parent AM zone, but also adds a number of regulations that help improve urban form and create pedestrian-friendly streets over time. I have some photo examples that can help us understand the highlights of the new AM10 subzone. This is a picture of a development on Baseline Road you may be familiar with. So the AM10 subzone requires that buildings be located close to the street, that a minimum of 50% of the ground floor facade facing the street is composed of windows and doors. And the doors that are provided, as is the case in this example, are active entrances, meaning that they provide actual customer access to commercial businesses, and in the case of residential, direct access to the residential building. Another example, this one's on Carling Ave. It has the same active frontage components as in the last image, with minimum doors and windows and being close to the street, having active entrances, but also 2 other important components. The first being the requirement for a minimum first floor height for non-residential or mixed-use buildings of 4.5 meters. And the second thing is minimum building height of 7.5 meters and 2 stories for the portions of the buildings within 10 meters of the street line. And that helps our urban form directly abutting the public realm. So moving on to a final example, this is one of a development on Maryvale Road. In this example, the property is being redeveloped in 2 phases. The first phase at the back would be an expansion to the existing building, and the zone provides for an expansion of the greater of either 600 square meters gross floor area or 20% of the building area, whichever is greater, to expand without having to comply with the active frontage, which would mean the buildings would have to be near the front. So in phase 2 proceeds in this example, would have to be located close to the street. A minimum of 50% of whatever is built along the street would have to be occupying a minimum frontage, and the setbacks of that minimum frontage that the 50% portion applies to is 3 meters for non-residential and mixed-use buildings and a 4.5 meter setback for residential use. The AM10 subzone also contains a series of exceptions for automotive-related use, such as gas bars and gas stations, as well as auto rental establishments and auto dealerships. This is just a sample map. We have one like this, or several of them, for each of our project areas that we'd be happy to draw from if questions come up about any of the study areas. And finally, in summary, the implementation of the zoning review project, it implements a commitment made by Council as part of the Building Livable Ottawa process last year to provide greater certainty and clarity in terms of aligning zoning bylaw regulations with the official plan policies. We also see it as being good for Ottawa's economy, meaning that we'll have fewer rezoning applications required simply for a property owner to be able to do on the property what's permitted in the official plan policy. And also adding a broader list of permitted uses in the zoning will open up opportunities for businesses of all sizes. Concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Just, Councilman, let's just go back to the understanding of what we're doing here is implementing the policies that reside in the OP.
Correct, Mr. Chair.
Right. So to the extent that we're not liking the result, and it's fair that we might not, in case I'm not making any judgments on that, what has to change is not only the zoning, but the policy that gives way or gives that gives rise to the zoning. People, and the reason I want to explore this a little bit is because people believe the penultimate document, the most important document, is the zoning, when in fact the most important document actually is the official plan, because the official plan gives way or is implemented by the zoning bylaw. So, for example, if you want to, if on a traditional main street you're really concerned about a 6-story height limit, changing the zoning to maintain it 4 without changing the official plan continues to allow an applicant to come forward and say, I meet the tests on a traditional main street of A, B, and C, and then you get into an argument. It becomes a compatibility argument. Well, I'm arguing it doesn't, and you're arguing it do, and we're back into that same sort of tests that we've always had here. So if you really want, on a traditional main street, to make sure it's only ever going to be 4 stories, then you've got to roll that back up and change the policy in the official plan. Would that be fair?
Mr. Chair, to eliminate spot rezonings, yes.
Okay. To eliminate spot rezonings, yes. You said that was like it was a bad thing. I'm not so sure it is. So and I guess I just want to make sure. I just want to. Sorry. And I just want to make sure that as we're working through this, the people understand that today, as a result of a policy discussion we had here, it's an implementation piece, and to the extent that that implementation piece isn't exactly what people believe it is, the solution is not here. It is here and back up in the official plan.
Mr. Chair, that is correct. The official plan sets out the policy direction, and the zoning studies before you today will implement the policies designed and approved in the OP. As you will note, there are instances where we talk about up to 6 stories, and there would be situations at times where, because of the size of the lot fabric or within the community character, there's issues with that. However, staff have reviewed and studied that for the streets that we're here about today. So we have zoned for the current policy as it provides.
It wasn't specific. It was just an example of what has to the change that has to happen. You could make the same argument on commercial frontages along Preston. There are all kinds of other places where applying the policy of the official plan isn't meeting, a particular need. The challenge is not just to fix it here, but to be able to go back and fix it in the other place. I just don't want people to say, well, it's done, I'm gone. All of a sudden, 2 years later, someone's back because they've consolidated some parcels, and they're back, and people are saying, well, wait a minute, 2 years ago, I thought we all fixed this. We actually didn't fix it. So, which has been sort of the rub of the last official plan, right? So we want to avoid, what we're seeking to is avoid that.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. We're here to bring more certainty for everyone so that everyone knows the rules.
Right. So when we're going to get a bunch of motions here, and as I said, we're going to refer them to you. You're going to go through them. You're going to write a report. You also need to be able to tell councillors when they deal with this at the first meeting in February, not only the solution at the implementation level, but what the solution is at the OP level, and be able to Mr. Mark's going to have to help you facilitate how you're going to work your way through the notice period and all of the other requirements to give the fix that people think they're getting when they're dealing with this. We won't be able to do it today or for this term of council. So, I mean, it's going to be something that will happen next year, right?
That is correct.
You just understand. I just want to make sure that when I leave on Monday, that I'm leaving, and when we leave this meeting, that we're clear on the way forward.
That is correct. We will prepare a memorandum that will be sent to all members of council, and it will outline all the motions that are presented here today, and it will provide a staff position as to whether or not staff supports or does not support, and if staff does not support, it will outline a rationale for that.
And you'll outline, all that aside, and you'll outline the path to fix the OP should the individual council want to advance that to council.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair.
Right.
Yes.
So let me just ask you to do one more thing. So I want you to, before you, memorandum is fine. I think because of the newness and the gravity of the issue, that you should make it a point to meet with members of council with their memorandum to make sure that they fully understand the course that they have to take to achieve what the motion or what is happening on that day, right?
That's very much appreciated as well for the timing that you're allowing us to do that, so we would certainly be able to do that for sure, to make sure everyone is aware.
Perfect. Okay. Any other questions to staff? Councillor Manette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick questions, and it's regarding St. Joseph Boulevard. Regarding to St. Joseph, could staff confirm if, in fact, the proposed increase in height has been taken out in the scope of the report following the concerns that I had brought forward and as well as the residents had brought forward?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the St. Joseph Boulevard corridor was taken out of the study.
Okay. And I just have one more quick question, and it's regarding the Leda Clay issue. And in regards to the soil stability with the Leda Clay in the area, it is my understanding that zoning overlay in 1978 and 1999 provided with some form of hazardous land designation. Could staff confirm why there is no such designation at this time, as well as what protection the residents have in terms of geotechnical safety in the future?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the official plan in one of the schedules does identify this area. However, the practices have evolved over the years since the Township of Gloucester zoning bylaw. And the way that Development Review Services intakes applications now is through site-specific soil conditions analysis, where we satisfy ourselves of the feasibility of a certain type of building or any engineering measures that are required, or indeed if a certain proposition is unsuitable. So it is on a case-by-case basis very much front and center in the minds of development review staff, and they are aware through the official plan designation in one of the schedules of the soil condition.
Okay, so before any major development in the future on St. Joseph, if it's dealing with the Leda Clay issue, there will be geotechnical studies undertaken before any improvements are put in place?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry. Councillor Cadre was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just coming back to a similar question from Councillor Manette, regarding Stittsville Main Street, where we are still working in the process, how is this going to affect that process or the secondary plan of that street?
Mr. Chairman, as it's identified in the official plan, the secondary plans would take priority if they were completed in terms of compliance with the official plan overall policies. So in this particular case, Councillor, we did not zone Stittsville Main Street as part of this particular study, and that will be deferred to the Stittsville CDP process that's in progress.
And that would apply to all of the next phases coming forward. I mean, this is phase 2. There's a phase 3 yet to come. So this would apply, that policy would apply to all those other phases.
That is correct.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question about Innes Road in Blackburn. The whole evaluation study, as we've gone through it, has talked about arterial Main Street, and you've been working on a motion with respect to traditional Main Street. And I just want to make sure that we get a clear understanding here. One of the reasons I'm asking this now is I have to run out at some point for a medical appointment when the motion probably gets introduced by my colleague. I may not be here to make those points. I hope to be back to vote on it, though. In terms of, we went along the process looking at this as the arterial road, or arterial Main Street. Some of the history that was probably lost when the community was first, the land was acquired for development. It was supposed to, basically develop from scratch. That was going to be the main street. That was prior to the Blackburn bypass being constructed. Once the Blackburn bypass was constructed, the region dumped the road off on the lower municipality, saying this is no longer our arterial. It's your local street. You do with it what you want. The motion that's before us, that's been sent out, it would recognize that this is probably a better designation or a more appropriate designation than the arterial. Is that the way you would see this?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we've worked with you, Councillor, to craft the wording of a motion that, if it's carried by the committee, would send staff to consider an official plan amendment. So I think Chair Hume referred to that in his opening remarks. The introduction of Innes through Blackburn Hamlet in the official plan as an arterial Main Street did two things. First, it gives it it makes it an intensification target area. So it gives Blackburn Hamlet a focus, a Main Street focus. So at the time when the official plan was adopted, it was adopted as an arterial Main Street, and we're simply today recommending a package that will carry that out. If the wish is to reconsider that, then we will come back with a recommendation having to do with an official plan amendment, and at that point there are two choices. Traditional Main Street is still an intensification target area. It has different rules with respect to building height. It has different rules with respect to setbacks and minimum density. So we'll be covering the implications of those changes through the time that the chair is giving us to cover these.
Thank you, and thank you for the help that you and your staff have provided on this. I think the impact in the end isn't much different because of the setbacks and because of the size of lots and everything else, but I think it provides some assurance to the folks who participated in the process who see the ultimate limit being considerably different. So I just want to thank you for that.
That's our pleasure, Councillor, and we'll be working with Councillor-elect Mittick through this process when he takes office.
Great. Councillor Eglai.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd also like to thank Ms. Steadden and her staff for the work that they did on Maryville Road. The outreach to the public and the community groups was fabulous and much appreciated. And this is a question for you, Ms. Steadden. We've had some discussions subsequent to that, and there's members of the community and members of the stakeholders group in the audience today. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about some of the further plans in terms of Maryville Road going forward over the next year or so. We have a motion that will be going forward that Councillor Caudry will be putting forward on my behalf, but there's some other things over and above that, and I'm wondering, while people are here, if you could speak to that.
Mr. Chairman, yes, we have some plans set underway for Maryville Road. I think it's very encouraging to hear that the community is engaged and wants to continue conversations on Maryville Road. We have committed to looking at this as part of our next term of council priority list of work plans that will come forward to Planning Committee for approval in the new year. But we are looking to host a visioning workshop in session with residents in Maryville with an opportunity to understand how they would like to see Maryville grow and evolve over time. And as we do know, it is a longer-term evolution that we expect on Maryville Road, but we also believe that some of the changes, even in this report, will help to support growth and development in that area. So we do look forward to the visioning exercise, and then depending upon the results of that visioning, there may be some tweaking necessary to the existing secondary plan.
Thank you very much for that.
Okay, are there any other questions for delegations? Councillor Chernushenko.
Thank you very much. As I guess my constituents would know, and staff with whom I've met many times on many different streets, looking at many different streets in my ward would know, I have been a proponent of the evolution of our larger streets towards being ones that offer more engagement with the street, where there is more human scale activity of the street, where they are not just throughways for vehicles, as we have seen, for example, Bronson in the Glebe section that we're looking at here today becoming. So the idea that it be rezoned as a traditional main street, as the official plan put forward, seemed to me a good one. We have heard the concerns of some residents about the negative things that might do. I'd like you, if you could, just summarize, put this almost backwards here. What do you think the implications of our not doing this now would be? How would you see the evolution of that street if it kept its current zoning as opposed to our doing this rezoning?
Mr. Chairman, through you, the stretches of Bronson that are proposed for rezoning today have legacy zoning from, I guess, the first iteration of the zoning bylaw in 1964, which is residential. And as a result, some of the examples of development that we've seen on Bronson Avenue include, in the vicinity of Powell Street, a very attractive condominium building, which architecturally is quite nice to look at, but unfortunately has no interaction with the street. And there was no ability from a zoning standpoint for the planning department to have an influence on how to have that building successfully construct the main street that is designated in the official plan. So that building now is a lost opportunity for about half a block's worth of frontage to have an active engagement with people on the sidewalk. So what our package does is it continues to permit residential, but it also introduces the ability to have retail at grade with openings to the sidewalk and mixed-use buildings. And that fully carries out the vision of a full-service, full mixed-use corridor that serves the abutting residential areas, but is also a pleasure to be on as well.
Is that good? Okay. Anybody else want to get in? Okay, so let's go to delegations. Let's get organized here, and we'll go to Eric Darwin. Mr. Darwin, if you'd like to come up. Mr. Darwin is coming up.
Mr. Chair, if I might just ask, is it the motions that we'll be putting forward would come after the delegations? Is that logical timing?
I forgot. Councillor Harder asked me to, if there are motions that committee members want to advance or tell people that are coming forward, if they want it, they can do that at any time. So in between delegations, we do have a number of them. So, okay, why don't we just do that right now? So Mr. Darwin, you can just sit there for a second. There are a number of motions. Councillor, why don't you lead off, and we'll
Thank you very much. It seemed to make good sense to do that, too, because it does allow the delegations to, in a sense, modify their remarks to comment on whether they are in favor of or against the motions, if the motion helps to address their issues or concerns. So thank you. Just as the actual motion, the important parts of the two motions that I have are extremely short, but there's a bit of an important preamble, which is many, though certainly not all, of the residents in the areas of these two rezonings at least support the theory behind the rezoning to traditional Main Street. Concerns have been raised. Some are still not in favor overall. I'm quite clear that I am and why. But the devil is in the details of whether this is going to accomplish the good of what we want without bringing a whole host of new problems. And so my motions are trying to specifically address a height where directly abutting thriving residential neighborhoods, so those streets of residential homes that are now not going to make a leap to a 6-story, even if it's tapering down to 4 stories, addressing that issue with its light and its, in a sense, feeling like you're in the shadow of a much larger building. So there's the height issue, which forms a part of the two motions, and then another quite specific one, which is not having commercial frontages allowed to, as we sometimes call it, wrap around the corner. So not to introduce a series of commercial buildings along what are completely residential streets at the moment. So my two motions, I will not read through them all, but essentially the one for Bronson Avenue, that whereas, based on discussions with residents of the community, the maximum height of development on the east side of Bronson Avenue between Renfrew Avenue and Clemmow, that's basically 2 blocks, should be limited to 14.5 meters, and that commercial frontages should be restricted to Bronson Avenue. Those are the two key points you've got in your shared drives, the full text and all of the quite specific language that our motions do, but those are the key words. And something very similar, but just addressing height, this is in Old Ottawa East, that the maximum height of development on the south side of Hawthorne Avenue between Colonel By Drive and Main Street, that's to 1 block, should be limited to 14.5 meters. Those are my two motions. Thank you.
Okay. Who else has motions? Councillor Caudry?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and this I'm moving on behalf of Councillor Aglai, and it's regarding the Maribel South area. Basically, again, I'm not going to read the whole motion. I'll let Councillor Aglai fill in the important information. Basically, what we're looking for is to amend the motion going forward, or amend the zoning application going forward to amend section 239 by creating a new exception 2217 with the following provision: for lots greater in area than 1,250 meters square or 2% of the total lot area must be provided as outdoor communal space located at grade anywhere on the lot, and such area can also be used towards complying with any amenity area requirements. So that's basically the gist of the motion, and I'll pass the floor over to Councillor Aglai to explain further. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Caudry, for bringing on my behalf. Just a little bit of background. The land we're talking about here is what we in Ward 9 call the Triangle. It's essentially where CGOH used to be before the fire, and it's the last big piece of undeveloped land along that stretch of road. During the community consultations, myself and staff heard very strongly that people wanted to take advantage of that property and the potential development and set aside some of that land for communal public green space. And so that's where this motion comes from. The community is very much behind it, and I thank staff for helping me draft the motion and Councillor Caudry for introducing it on my behalf.
Okay, perfect. Councillor Lois.
I'm going to skip the preamble here because I talked about it earlier about the difference between arterial Main Street and traditional Main Street, but basically the motion is that that if this carries, that staff amend document 5, the maps illustrated the recommended zoning, and amend the recommended zoning to delete Innes Road from maps 1, 2, and 3, amend document 6, details of recommended zoning as follows, remove the recommended zoning for item 7, AMX subzone for Innes Road, and that there be no further notice pursuant to section 3417, and should item 1 above be carried by planning committee, staff will be directed to undertake an assessment on the appropriateness of a traditional Main Street designation along Innes Road within Blackburn, and report back to planning.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. There are two motions that I'm putting forward, both of them concerning Preston Street, north of Somerset Street. That area of Preston from Somerset to Albert is almost entirely residential. We had someone here today, she just had to go to an appointment, but lives in a 5-door row and is quite concerned that the row house beside her could convert to commercial. So that's highly problematic for those residents of Preston Street. We have new families moving in with kids. It's becoming a very strong residential area. And so one of the motions is to remove, it's A, B, and C. They are the residential properties fronting on Preston. Remove them from the map. The other motion talks about changing the height from 6 stories to 4 and removing the commercial use of restaurant. Preston Street's a restaurant street. What will move into those row houses are restaurants. So I'm sending both of those to staff, Mr. Chair, and the neighborhood is quite concerned about the commercialization of Preston Street.
Right. So, and I'm assuming the corollary to that is that you're going to want to know what amendments you need to make to the official plan to
Absolutely.
ensure. Right.
Absolutely, for the new council.
Right.
Yeah,
Got
thank
it.
you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, good. Any other ones? And there is a technical motion that we have that, sorry? Yeah, so Councillor Hard will move it, and it relates to St. Laurent Boulevard in the area of Noranda, Malaratic, and Cote Street. Okay, so those are the ones that are on the table now. There may be more. Over to Mr. Darwin.
Thank you. I'm delighted to speak to you today on behalf of the Dalhousie Community Association, which operates in the Little Italy and Chinatown neighborhoods. We all know that Preston Street, we're familiar with it from the Somerset Street south to Carling Avenue segment, which is predominantly commercial, and we're delighted to have that Main Street in our neighborhood. I want to bring your attention to the area north of Somerset. See if we can get this picture to come up. There we go. The current zoning is a perfect match to the existing land uses, and those are the areas on the map called C and A and B. Those are low-rise townhouses. All the way along the street, it's 100% residential. Even at the top right corner where it's in gray and not painted yellow, those are also townhouses. They belong to the city, Ottawa Community Housing. So you can see it's a long residential street, and the zoning is consistent with that. It calls for it to be residential. Area G at the bottom is the only commercial area there. It's a single parcel of land which has its vehicular access off Somerset Street. So we're asking that the low-rise residential land use be recognized as desirable and good and be maintained in the official plan. We do note that other main streets in the city have commercial zones that change to residential zones while they're on the same main street. So these are frequently recognized as such in CDPs, and there's no call to rezone them. So I don't think it's required that just because this is a main street, it has to be rezoned as commercial. That's not necessary. I'd also like to point out in the Bayview-Carling CDP, and I'll show you the picture here, which was launched in 2010. The city recognized this area as a stable, low-rise residential nature of the street. Preston Street is in the little dotted, the little blue dotted zone running up in the right-hand side of that picture. And you'll note, unfortunately, I seem to have cut off the key, or I'm not showing the key to the diagram, but the key indicates that the white areas are stable, low-rise residential areas. And here it is in your CDP saying this is a stable, low-rise residential area, and then you're saying, let's change it. So we want to keep it the way it is. For the 2 decades that I've been foolish enough to participate in planning studies, such as the Preston Secondary Plan in 1996, I've always advocated that we recognize these stable residential areas as residential areas. And in every case, the city, in every single study, has said, we're not challenging those, we're just identifying the areas where there should be change and calling for those. So as a result, the city doesn't expressly reconfirm that these stable residential areas exist and are there. So now all this predates the recently introduced bright line concept, and I'd like to commend our outgoing councillor, Catherine Hobbs, for including the idea of clearly separating the stable low-rise residential areas subject to incremental intensification from the areas in a CDP that are designed for high-rises or extensive new development. The bright line of separation first appeared in the Scott CDP last year. But it has come too late for the Preston area. All 3 of our CDPs are largely in place, and staff is reluctant to deal with the bright line concept in our area, or in the case of this portion of Preston Street, the plan was passed years ago before the bright line came along. So if we had had that bright line concept, then I'm sure that the CDP would have included this area as a stable, low-rise residential area. So I'd also like to bring to your attention that in the text coming towards you today in the proposal, the text says on page 10 that no additional zoning changes have been proposed within areas that were subject of more recent comprehensive studies. And I've just showed you that in 2010 we had the Bayview CDP saying this was a stable residential area. And I would also point out that this area was zoned for low-rise residential, and there was no call to change it. I'd also point out that on page 12, which is the second paragraph I highlight up there on the wall, most properties in the traditional Main Street OP designation are currently zoned TM in the zoning bylaw. Well, that's not correct. The area shown, which I've already shown you and I'll show you again on this one here, is consistently zoned residential. And we think it should stay that way, because a good city plan includes viable residential hinterland supplying clientele to the commercial main streets. And we don't want to squander the good residential areas that we have now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Other questions for the delegation? Thank you very much for Mr. Down for your presentation. Mr. Faubert, if you'd like to come up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually here representing my own interest, which is a property at 507 Gladstone. And my understanding was there was to be a technical amendment introduced for that street. I need some clarification on that. Faubert, F-O-B-E-R-T. Not up there.
Well, if there's a technical amendment, I haven't seen it yet.
Mr. Chairman, I can provide some details.
That's okay. Do you have an amendment to address Mr. Faubert? Okay, yes. So the answer is yes, some way it will make its way up to me.
Okay. The technical amendment is, I think inappropriately, the bylaw proposed restricted office use to a maximum of 225 square meters. on this traditional Main Street. I have an architectural plan in the works to potentially move our office there, which would include retail on the ground floor, office on the second and third floor, and residential on the fourth floor. We could not do our office there, and I think that it was not intended by either the CDP or the secondary plan. Both promote the opportunity to redevelop that street. We're well within the height limit. Actually, we're below the height limit. We're meeting the mixed-use nature of the policy, and so I support the technical amendment, which I understand staff is also supporting and recommending.
We're figuring it out. Okay. So do we have any questions for Mr. Faubert? Oh, Councillor Holmes.
I'd like to see a map of the property, Mr. Chair.
It's area I, if you have it on your schedule there.
Mr. Chairman, I can provide details.
That would be helpful.
I don't know.
So, Mr. Chairman, what Mr. Faubert has brought to our attention is related to the Centertown Secondary Plan's designation of secondary Main Street. When we went to implement zoning for the secondary plan of secondary Main Street, we had to deal with the policy direction of providing for a mix of uses, commercial, retail, and residential uses that were scaled locally and that were locally serving. So we did that for retail uses, and that's why you have a cap of 225 square meters for retail uses. Basically what we're saying is, you know, Gladstone is not a place for a 15,000 square foot big pharmacy. Mm-hmm. But we didn't focus on office, and notwithstanding Mr. Faubert and his property, we do want to look at the corridor and say, I mean, if this was a video gaming software company that wanted to come to Gladstone and has 25 or 30 employees, would that be the proper fit for a secondary Main Street, accepting that we're not looking at an office tower here, we're looking at small-scale office uses. So our motion is proposing to take the office out of the 225-meter cap, and we want to come back with what we think will be the appropriate cap for neighborhood serving or locally scaled office uses, but we just haven't done the work yet. So we will be coming back to committee with what we think will implement the direction of the secondary plan and permit small-scale office buildings on this Main Street.
And how is that going to be circulated to the public, so there's time for public meeting and public discussion?
Exactly, Mr. Chairman.
And what is the time frame?
Well, I've heard it said that we were now going to the first meeting in February, so that gives us time to circulate the package, do the research, first of all, circulate the package, speak with the community about it, and then come back.
Good, thank you.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. Joan Spice, would you like to come up? Okay, Joan, I'll hold you off and come back. Bob McCaw, is Mr. McCaw here?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Bob McCaw. I'm here on behalf of the Knoxdale-Merivale Council of Community Associations, or the KMC, which includes all the community associations in Ward 9. With me today is Terence Lonergan, our volunteer urban planning guru. I may ask him to respond to any detailed questions that might come our way. The KMC has placed on the record a letter from our chairperson which sets out our views on the arterial Main Street portion of Merivale Road. Today we have just 6 points to leave you with. First, the Merivale South Review area from Baseline to West Hunt Club covers 168 hectares. Among the AM zones in Ottawa, it's unique for its size, compactness, and centrality. This portion of Merivale Road has the potential of giving Ottawa an urban and commercial midtown hub, offering a very wide choice of facilities. I want to especially stress that the vacant lands in Merivale Triangle that have already been referred to, around Baseline, Clyde, and Merivale, offer great potential, not just for intensification, but for development of a true gathering space, a focal point for a new midtown. Second point, although the present rezoning review is a partial measure and not a complete plan for future development, the city's overall approach has much to commend it. The city is just starting to consider the interplay between zoning and infrastructure, and we believe these studies should be given high priority. Third point, these amendments today will base zoning and arterial main streets on 3 major criteria: density, building height, and active street frontage. As to density, the KMC considers that the objective of 120 jobs and/or residents per hectare in the Merivale AM is probably reasonable. We certainly hope that if and when this number is revised with new iterations of the official plan, it will take into account local factors such as observed mobility, as well as the principles outlined in the provincial policy statement in the official plan. Second is height limitation. That's a straightforward and most useful zoning criterion. Setting building height to a maximum of 9 stories or 30 meters offers plenty of scope for developers to reach and even exceed the minimum density requirement while protecting our area from overcrowding. However, the proposed zoning amendment contains loopholes and inconsistencies. There's the possibility of building up to 12 stories, which hangs ambiguously over the entire zone. There are some specific areas on Merivale Road, some large and some small, which have current maximums at 34 or even 39 meters, and it's proposed to maintain those. Why are we doing that? The KMC invites the Council to impose a standard height limit at 30 meters, valid across the whole arterial Main Street area. Should there be some requirement to exceed this limit, a review and public consultations should be held. My fourth point today, active frontage is not a robust criterion such as density or height. It consists of a loose package of regulations, including setbacks, frontage, staggered maximum building heights when there's close proximity to residential buildings and areas. Furthermore, active frontage relates exclusively to the visual experience from the street. It virtually ignores the rest, namely both the road itself and the inside of the AM zone. KMC believes that we should deal with the whole perspective, the entire AM zone, its inside as well as its streetscape. More work is needed here if definite regulations are to be included in the present review. The fifth point, although the overall approach adopted by the city to review the AM zoning seems promising, we fear it will not achieve its stated goals on the Merivale Road South area. One major obstacle today, traffic tie-ups. That, of course, is the complaint of everyone who ever drives on Merivale. But beyond that, many local businesses are complaining that as long as traffic does not flow better up and down Merivale Road, it will make little or no sense for them to invest in redevelopment of their properties. Thus, there's a danger that the new zoning bylaw will not contribute to the renewal and modernization of our arterial Main Street. The pursuit of active frontage without consideration for what is happening on the road is a recipe for failure, for it puts the city at risk of transforming Merivale Road into a hardened canyon that is far too narrow for present and future use. Our last point, the KMC is well aware that no plan has been formulated, no budget set aside for the renewal of the Merivale roadway. This omission is no longer tenable. We've heard talk of a Merivale visioning exercise today, and the KMC urges Council to undertake a wide-ranging Merivale visioning exercise aimed at first producing the plan and the budget required for a total overhaul of the roadway and examining the broader issues that we've raised today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Are there questions for the delegation? Councillor Egerlein?
Well, this is actually a question for staff arising out of something the delegation raised.
Off you go.
Okay, thank you. So one of the comments Mr. McCaw made was around the 9 stories, yet I think the term used, there's 12 stories sort of hovering over the plan. Can you speak to that and how that may or may not work?
Mr. Chairman, through you, again, I mean, this is an exercise of implementing official plan direction. Merivale Road has a right-of-way of about 36 meters in width. So a building height of 30 meters would be basically a little less than a one-to-one relationship. And actually, Mr. McCaw's input, we thought, was extremely thoughtful and extremely well aimed at the need for a comprehensive view of corridors like Merivale, which are now at an inflection point in how they're going to go through their next generation of development. In our minds, I mean, we are delighted to hear that of all the measures that we're recommending to you today, the one that makes them that satisfies them the least is that our active frontage provisions are not strong enough. It's a struggle just to get there. But I think even in looking at a corridor comprehensively, it does not negate the need to get the zoning right. And this is what I think we're doing in an incremental way to get us all started on the way to the renewal that everybody wants for Merivale and for arterials like Merivale. So again, I mean, the official plan direction with respect to building height does call for mid-rise buildings up to 9 stories. The proportional relationship to the right-of-way width, I think, is one that will not create a canyon effect. This is something that even on traditional main streets that are narrower, a 9-story building can often be introduced successfully and have a good relationship to the street. But obviously there is work to be done, and you've heard Ms. Sneddon say that we are taking a closer look at other directions that are being provided for Merivale in order to starting to get the pieces right.
Thank you for that. I'm not sure it answered the question completely, though. I guess what I'm getting at, and I think what Bob raised, is under what circumstances could a site suddenly go from 9 to 12?
Mr. Chairman, in the official plan, there are criteria with respect to where you can do that. It's major intersections, and it's only subject to a zoning amendment.
Okay. So it's possible that it could happen if we approve this today or going forward, but there would have to, at that time, there would have to be a separate application brought forward to have the discussion with the community as to whether it would be 9 or 12. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And just one quick comment that I wanted to make, Bob, in response to the comments about traffic. Part of the visioning process that will be going forward in 2015 is Ms. Sneddon and I have already talked about it, and we are going to be engaging city traffic staff to be part of that process as well, so that forms part of the
well, we certainly welcome that, Councillor. Okay. If I might, Mr. Chair, my concern about 12 stories and 34, even 39 meters is that the recommendations in the zoning review on the maps, there are a number of areas that currently have zoning of 34 height, which has continued into the new zoning. And one in particular, where the Food Basics Mall is now on Merivale Road, a fairly small piece of land that has 39 meters height, and that is being continued. So that what we would recommend is that these be reduced to 30.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions for the delegation? Oh. Thank you very much for your presentation. Carolyn McKenzie. Glebe Community Association.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Carolyn McKenzie, and I'm here representing the Glebe Community Association. I'd just like to begin by saying that the GCA is not here this morning to object to the actual traditional Main Street policy or rezoning on the stretch of Bronson Avenue between Carling Avenue and the Queensway. that is in the current official plan. I think to your earlier points, Mr. Chairman, I think most residents are in fact sensitive to the traditional Main Street policy and the overall policy of intensification as being necessary to prevent the loss of more green space to suburban sprawl. How that will be done remains to be seen, though, given the existing congestion at times and vehicle speeds at other times that we see on Bronson Avenue every day. But I think what this underlines is that these policies really must be implemented with sensitivity if we're going to achieve the objectives of a more vibrant, livable city. The amendment tabled today will assist in doing just that. My understanding has been that traditional Main Street policies in the OP, it states that it supports compatible development that respects the character of the streets and adjacent areas. It also goes on to mention with building heights between 4 and 6 stories. So I guess our understanding was, given that mention in the official plan regarding 4 to 6 stories, we had been of the understanding that the amendment as proposed would be consistent and not create loopholes for developers to be able to drive through in future to ask for greater heights. But so I do appreciate the clarification that has been provided that that's perhaps not in fact the case, and if tweaking the official plan to be in agreement with the amendments is something that's being proposed here, I think we would definitely support that and appreciate that that work that is yet to be done. I would like to state in the strongest possible way that we are very concerned with the negative impacts that increased heights of 6 stories, as well as the commercial activity fronting onto adjacent side streets, will have on directly impacted residents and on the neighborhood as a whole. These elements of the defaults, and I'll call it default in terms of parameters, basic parameters of the traditional Main Street zoning, really do not respect the character of this neighborhood and the adjacent area. The east side of Bronson Avenue, and we are focused on the east side, is a stable and well-established residential neighborhood. 6-story buildings, even with the setbacks and the height step backs, are simply not compatible with and do not respect the established neighborhood that